was on Monday night, Councillor Kramer and I were at the Ascot Hotel, and we were scheming with Councillor Ford that there might be good reason for him and me to be somewhere else over some risk matter on Sturt Island, but Councillor Ford didn't play the game. I was going to say, John, we assumed that you would take over running an 800-page agenda, so but I couldn't get there, so I'm here. So it was a good attempt, Abel, but anyway, never mind. We're here, bright and rosy, so which is superb. Thank you for that. It is a full agenda, and we do have a workshop at the end of that too. So the whip is probably on myself that I try and chair a reasonably quick and efficient meeting. But clearly, for those of you that have had as you all have had a chance to have a crack at the agenda, it will be a full day. So if we can keep ourselves to the point and to the mark, I'm sure we'll get through it well, which is superb. And with that, can I just thank the staff. It is a good agenda. They are good papers, and they do give us the chance to have a good discussion around our finances, risk and assurance. So thank you to everybody that's been involved in getting us there. Which is superb. Right, I don't have any indications of apologies, so I can move on from that. No leave of absences. Oh, sorry, under apologies, just note, Mayor Gary, you're indicating you need to probably step out at some stage. I guess that's cool, and no problems with that.
So, Mr. Chair, 2 o'clock is a meeting that I need to attend, so 2 o'clock.
Right, cool. Is anybody else in the room? I'll just make sure to keep a quorum. So two are out. What's my quorum? 4. Okay, you guys got to stay. You can't go. Okay, you're locked and chained to the table, along with Don. So we've got a quorum. I suppose I count too. Perhaps. Oh, do I count? Good. Okay. Rightio. No, that's fine. I understand. 2 o'clock. Got to slip out.
Three members. No, 3 members is quorum.
Okay. Yeah. Are you guys away for a while?
2 o'clock.
Yes. Okay. I understand that's urgent, and it's probably something that we'll discuss a wee bit later on.
Just move and get them over in a second for these early departures.
Okay. Can I just thank you, John. Seconded. Thank you, Julie. All those in favour for that, please say aye. Those against? It's carried. Thanks a lot. I've got no indication of leaves of absence. Are there any matters that have caused you to think about your interests and whether they conflict? There are none. That's great. I've not been indicated that there's anybody wishing to speak for public forum, or there's no urgent or late extraordinary items, which is tremendous. Can we please move to the item 6, which is the confirmation of the minutes. Could I have a mover and a seconder for the adoption of these as a true and correct? Thank you, Abel. Seconded by John. Are there any matters of accuracy or comments people need to make in that motion? All pretty much like the meeting I was at. That's good. I'll put that then, please. All those in favour, please say aye. Those against? Cracker. Right, we can then move to 7.1 in your pack. I need to probably keep wise and keep us up with the page numbers, which is 25, if I've got it correct in terms of the agenda. Anne, we're in your hands, I think.
Yes, good morning, Mr. Chairman, fellow councillors. I'd just like to present the Finance and Assurance Committee work plan for the year end of 30th of June 2021. Of course, this is the first reporting period that we've got for this work plan. So in regards to what's on it, we've got the risk report and health and safety report, which we're planned for our next meeting, but there were some super efficient members of staff and they've introduced them to this report. We've also got the new reports around the policy on development financial contributions, policy on draft procurement policy, health and safety events, and 3 reports and confidential over contracts to go through. And there's a deferral to the next meeting of the financial report, which will be for the results for August, the LTP assumptions, policies and principles, and the internal audit report, which we've just recently received and we're just working through now. I'd also just like to make a change to the recommendation number on B. I see that it still says the Finance and Audit Committee. It should say the Finance and Assurance Committee, and thank you to Michelle for pointing that out to me.
Right, are there any questions or clarifications for Anne as far as our agenda is concerned? A couple of comments from me. I just note the next meeting on the 16th is significant for indeed what the agenda is here, both in terms of the annual report, although we'll come back to that under a separate item, but also the long-term plan assumptions, policies and principles. I know you guys are working really hard. That's a significant role for us as a committee to take, and we should recognise that as important. And I only have one other question, and it might be perhaps a December type thing. We have an approach in June next year, believe it or not, on insurance renewal. Do we actually get a report back on the insurance actually placed?
So that's usually covered at the same time. So
Okay,
that policy is covering what's actually
Yep.
being insured and what's been placed.
Okay, thank you very much. Right, with that, I do have a mover and a seconder, don't I?
No, you
I
didn't.
don't. Can I have somebody please move the adoption of these with the suitable word changing to finance and assurance? Thank you, Gary. Thank you, Julie. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against? It's carried.
Right, we're gonna move
You've
to-
changed my, yes, we have.
Yep.
I want to go to an item, sorry, and I should have said that there is a wee bit of, for the sake of staff in particular, there's a wee bit of change in the actual order of the agenda. And in fact, I'd like to be able to take item 7.4, the interim performance report first. It's on page 247 of your agenda. So sorry about that. I should have indicated that. If we could take 7.4 first, then 7.3, then 7.5 and 6. And I think we come back to 7.2 towards the end. Sorry. So we are skipping 7.2, leaving it, but we want to take 7.4 for the benefit of staff who I do appreciate you being here, but I do suspect in the madness of the year probably have other things you'd be loved to be doing as well. Oh, yeah, there we go. Welcome, you guys. Thank you. Shannon, I take it you're leading off for us, please.
I am, yes. So, good morning, Mr. Chair and committee of members. I'll take this report as read. This report presents the committee with the results of the third interim performance report for the financial year and as part of the organisation's corporate performance reporting for your review and feedback. Listed in the interim performance report are all the key performance indicators or KPIs, the agreed targets and the results against the targets that the activity managers set as part of the 2018-2028 LTP process. There are a total of 113 KPIs, and the external KPIs results are put into the annual report to report back to the community on how we did for the year. So just a couple of key points. So the results show that 77 KPIs or 68% achieved their targets, and 36 KPIs or 32% didn't achieve their targets, which is fairly bad. So of those that were not achieved, we have listed them all in a table in paragraph 17, and we have also shown categorized the reasons for not achieving the target, and the categories are resource demand or external. Within the issues section, we also discuss the KPI structure and the two significant events that happened during the year, which are the major flooding event that occurred within the reporting year and the impact of the COVID-19 lockdown on some of the KPIs. We have a number of activity managers available and ourselves, and we're happy to answer any questions you may have about this report.
Thank you for that, Shannon. And I must confess, I read the one on the annual report first before I got to this one. And I want to reflect that it's good. It's a good alignment that we're dealing with this, and also we will deal with the annual report. There is very close tie over, so it's really superb. Okay, can I just see if members have questions or points of clarification? Yes, Paul.
Just one point, it's page 276, 2.3, it's about the percentage of effluent tests. And it says that 41 out of 44 are compliant. And it just says a sentence, tests at Riversdale and Ojai, but it doesn't say what the tests at Riversdale and Ojai were. It's 273 and 276. The 276 will be the relevant one, I think, in terms of the report. I presume they were non-compliant.
Nitrogen.
Yeah, okay. It just mightn't hurt to expand on that.
I think it's possibly expanded in the actual CAMS report, but may not flow through.
Right, okay, yeah, sure.
Let's see if we can just find that for Paul, though, Ian. So you're saying it's in the, it's somewhere here, isn't it?
Through the chair, do you know what the KPI number was?
Yeah, 2.3 on page 276, is that what you're asking for?
Thank you.
So essentially, I presume the equivalent is that you said it was Riversdale and
Ojai.
Ojai essentially were outside the performance parameters, correct?
Now we can expand on that.
Yeah. Okay. Always important to know. Are there any other questions? Yeah, Abel.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair, on page 277, 5.1.3, percentage of compliance with regulatory standards for amounts of proposal. It says that the Eastern Bush and Ojai were not compliant. Currently, there's no protocol treatment in place at Eastern Bush. Is there any health implications for this? Is there any concerns of this? It says they're going to build a new park in 2021, but are there any implications on households?
Eastern Bush is currently chlorinated, which minimises risk. And users are also advised to boil water until we can get the new plant up and running.
So there's no health issues because it wasn't still no health issues.
We're minimising the risk. We have. I have no concerns.
So you, Mr. Chair, might be useful that was expanded on. It's not a resolution that is clearly identified that there is no risks to our community. These are failures. A, I would like to know why. And what the implications are and what we're doing to minimise the risk as that would be useful information.
Sure.
Just on that, so notice it talks about a faulty value. I think it should be valve.
That may be an important point again, as I say, the alignment between this and the annual report. In terms of our accountability, I think it's important to reflect we have mitigations in place, which I think the answer is no risk, but mitigates the risk. I suspect is the actual words we should be using as far as that's concerned. Notwithstanding the service issue that we've got a supply that requires people to boil water, which is a real pain in the butt, so to speak. Okay, thank you. Should be careful how I say these things, shouldn't I? Okay, any other questions, folks? Just a couple from me, if that's okay, please, Shannon, if I can find them. I was interested, actually, Ian, you might be able to help me here. The average consumption of water per resident was 889 litres per day. That seemed like quite a high number. That's on, sorry, I'm looking at page 257. I'm just looking at the exceptions, which is the ones that were presumably read in the main report. We had the target of 850, which still seems high, but it looks like by June the actual was 889. That's a lot of litres per person, isn't it?
It is quite a high number, yeah, Mr. Chair. It's pretty consistent with a lot of rural councils.
Yeah.
They have larger sections, lot people want to water them.
Yeah.
But it also is a factor of the way that the measure is accounted for, in that it doesn't actually take account of the any water losses
Yeah.
through the
I see that from
the
the,
system.
yeah. And what sort of percentage do you, I should have looked somewhere, what's your percentage of water loss that you think you're
Our
running in
percentage
this?
water loss is around about 27% at the moment.
Yes, yeah. Interesting service challenges. Yeah, sorry,
Oh,
Shannon.
sorry. I'd just like to point out in the annual report, we the result for the previous year was 924 litres. So we have
Reduce
made
them.
improvements to
Yes,
the water
yeah.
loss.
Yeah, that's interesting, isn't it? And I probably had been thinking of a more urban environment, Ian, and I had thought it would be half that would be the normal sort of consumption level. But I'm not an expert, but that reflects a relatively high cost of maintenance of systems when you're having to pump through that amount of water per person. So it's a not quite the discussion for here, but it's a discussion for a different place.
I suppose the question for vote, Mr. Chairman, is that 20% is that an acceptable level within the industry, or is it too high, average? Seems to be quite high.
25% is probably consistent across the board.
25?
Mm.
Okay.
So with the renewals program that we've got planned,
And that one.
that will help to bring us down to that and below that even.
Thank you.
It depends where you measure it, Abel, but
Well,
it still
exactly,
it still
that's why-
says a quarter of your water you're treating to let it soak out somewhere,
Oh,
which has the attendant cost. So yeah, okay, that's sweet. One thing I'm looking now at 16.1, Shannon, which is I'm looking at page 258, which is actually the average quality of ride on sealed local roads, which we only measure every second year, and this is the year that we don't measure. And I must confess again, I'm thinking about our accountability in the annual report. We must have confidence, I would presume, that we have maintained standards from when it was measured last year. And I'm wondering how we can assert that here so that it's not actually a not measured or a problem. I make some assumption that we do maintain systems which give us confidence to assume our level of service, read smoothness, is maintained in the year that we don't measure. And if that's the case, why don't we say that in our annual report and indeed here, and not have it as an exception? Perhaps I'll leave that as a rhetorical question, but I make the assumption the inspection program, whatever it is, gives us confidence that we are maintaining that level of service, correct?
So through the chair, that's the one that we do every 2 years, but the roading is monitored just about every day by roadwork and
Yeah.
the Fonterra vehicles, etc. So
Which is good, Gary.
Yeah.
But
I get
what
what you're
you can see what I'm saying is that we look at a reasonable, wrong word, annual report is absolutely truthful. We haven't done a survey this year.
Yeah.
But I'm making the presumption that politically we are prepared to be accountable, that our roads are still up to record standard, even though we won't measure until next year. I'd like to see us assert that. And I think because we have systems and processes in place, it should meet any form of external accountability.
So through you, Mr. Chair, Shannon, we can update the commentary just to reflect that. can't
Yeah.
we?
Sweet, that's good.
We'll just follow on from this. Why don't we do it each year? I mean, surely the data is collected. It's just a case of pulling it together. Is that not true?
Through the chair, I'm not entirely sure because the running team up here, but I know that there was one that had quite a substantial cost in doing, and it may be that one, but I'm not sure if that's the exact one I was thinking of.
Yeah, I don't think that's, John, unusual to have the cycle over every 2 years, but I'm always conscious that when we have a measure, which we say, well, we can't deal to because we haven't done the measurement this year, it's incredibly, over such a key measure, suddenly you think, well, wait a sec, this doesn't make sense. Gary, that's why I'm glad what you said. We have systems and processes in place, John, that I'm sure make us confident that we have maintained that level. We must know that, otherwise we wouldn't want to do the measurement next year. Yeah. Shannon, just one other thing, and it's a bit of, or two other things. It's just a wee bit of alignment with the annual report. I love on page 261. the two key issues, the flood impact, the COVID, I thought that was really good. I'm not certain, I mean, I've seen the COVID note, I'm not entirely certain that I saw the good words that are sitting here around the flood event impacts in the annual report, which I think would be relevant to have. Just it's a check. I'm not saying that it's not there. It could be that I've read the annual report too quickly, but it struck me that that has actually been significant for us, and it does influence our performance and accountability for the year. Sorry, one other thing that I just want, last little question, paragraph 27 on page 261, it says KPI 11.1, which was about dog control, believe it or not. Don't know why I've got into dogs, but I have. Did not have the resource to measure the KPI. What does that mean? Does that mean we haven't got the staff resource to measure something that we're going to hold ourselves accountable to?
I think there's 2 staff down.
It means that in this particular year, we didn't put it into the criteria to get it monitored. So technically, yes, it means that we didn't have the capacity because of all the other process improvements that we were doing.
Right.
To do that this year round. We were unfortunately, fortunately, we were putting in the dog registrations online, going live with that. So
Yes.
we were spending quite a bit of capacity on that.
Yeah. Friend, I think that we should just own that if that's the case. I mean, you're owning it here, but again, I'm reflecting on making the reality of our annual report our document about accountability, and I mean, let's just call it for what it is. That's really what I'd be saying. So I think that would reflect it. That's really useful. Look, thank you for giving me that time to have the questions. Just having done that now, are there any other questions members would like before I seek to have a motion put, Paul?
Oh, just on that, I didn't notice until now, but on page 261, item 20, we're talking about the floods. A number of townships, including Gore and Matara, are evacuated. We should include Wyndham there, it's in our district, because it's in our district.
Yeah.
And even part of Fort Rose, and there was other farms evacuated, but how much detail we want to get into.
Yeah, I'm not sure why we wouldn't have included.
I think we're moving. Yeah. Okay.
Just one question.
Yeah, sure, Abel.
113 KPIs.
Yep.
And whether or not that is too excessive.
Yeah.
But it is quite a exercise to go through. Like we do need to be held accountable. I'm not divorcing myself from that. But certainly I would question the need to have 113 KPIs, whether or not we can condense some of these and get a little bit more focused.
Well, you have that chance with the LTP,
Exactly.
Abel. So, I mean, I take it you're raising it. I mean, sorry, your point's very well made, but the LTP is a good place. I would want to say, Shannon, I'm very impressed with the annual report and the length that you and the team have gone to actually report our performance. I think it actually, in that sense, is great accountability. And I know we'll get to that when we get to the annual report. But I take your point, Abel, that as always, the nirvana is how do you say more with less? Yeah, take it on board. Okay, look, I'd like to move from the chair that if we can move to the resolutions on page 248, that we received this, we note it's not significant, and that we've complied with the Act. Thank you, Abel, as seconder. I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Those against? It's carried. Thank you, you guys. Hartley, we can let you go. We were talking roading before, but we've moved on. So sorry about that.
Over the smooth ride.
Yeah. We've agreed we've got smooth roads. That's what we were discussing. So we're okay. Right. Can I move now in the readjusted agenda to 7.3? So we're going back one step to the draft annual report. Please, it's the next thing. I'm going to get the page right, page 33. So if you thought you were going well at 260, we're now back to the start. So this is the most exciting item on the agenda, accounting, isn't it?
Please do think that.
You know, I've already told my joke once, you know, the world is divided into two, accountants and those that would like to be accountants. So there we go. Rightio, so there we go. Okay. I know, it's true. What's that, sorry? You're right. A bad joke is one you have to justify. That's right. But anyway, we're sitting there. I know Anne agrees with me, so she's pretty good. Right. Got to keep a sense of humour, haven't we?
Do you want to raise the-
Right. Fair point. Fair point. We have had a bit of transactional emails floating around. So Anne, I might just throw it your way to explain. We've got what's inside our agenda, but there was stuff that was in our inbox last night. Or sorry,
That's
Sheree,
okay. I'm
maybe
happy
that you
to
should do
run you
that.
through that.
Yeah.
So as you'll appreciate, the agenda was compiled last week. And so the team have continued to work on the document. You would have noticed that there was a number of sections highlighted in yellow, which effectively were the pieces that we were still working through. So over this past 4 days, we've continued to work on updating those sections. And also doing an initial level of Q&A over the document as well. And so the version that was circulated last night is basically the most up-to-date version as at 4 o'clock last night. There is still a couple of sections that are highlighted, which we've still got just to double check. But we have cleared off like a number of the like the commitments and the contingencies and the subsequent event notes, project tables, and yeah, done some transposed figures and typos and fixed all those the likes up. So the changes that were made were marked in the email version in blue text to assist you in seeing those changes. Overall, nothing significant has changed. The primary financial statements were still reporting the same numbers. And the performance results were all still the same. So yeah, just continuing on, as we say, it's a working draft until we put the final stamp on it. Yeah, to work through our processes. The other comment that was in the covering memo that was sent out with that was also in relation to the timing in regards to our audit. So I'll speak to that a little bit more as we talk through the report. If you have
I suspect if the members are similar to me, obviously probably the primary work and review has been done on what was in the agenda. And I'd suggest that we work through what's in the agenda, but it may well be, and we should recognise that you might, I'm sure you'll say, Sheree, oh, I got that covered. And if you look at the new one, that's fine. We know where it stands.
Yeah.
So I appreciate that this is iterative, and I think that would be the most useful way. I do propose that we do whip through it, not page by page, but section by section. But before I do that, Sheree, is there anything that you need to, now that you've given us an update on where things are at, actually anything particular about the annual report and speaking to your report?
Do you want to?
Or was that you, Shannon? Sorry, whoever
I'll
needs
let
to,
Shannon do
whoever needs to lead
performance, and then
off.
I'll
Sorry.
talk a little bit about some of the numbers and the issues.
Okay, so just give you a very brief summary of the non-financial performance results. So further to Abel's comment before about there was 113 KPIs, there is a slightly less number reported in the annual report because a number of the ones from the interim performance report are internal KPIs. So for the purposes of the annual report, there's 81 KPIs. So of those, there was 55 that achieved their target, which is 68%. There was 2 that were not measured, and I believe we just mentioned one of those. That was a biennial one, and the same with the other one that isn't measured was again a biennial target. And there were 24 targets that were not achieved. So that was around 30% that were not achieved. So that was the non-financial performance results. And I'll also give you a brief overview of the capital projects that we report on, and just like to note that the capital projects we had on the table in section 1, that doesn't include the whole roading program in there, but of the ones that are in there, there's 169 projects, and overall 64 were completed, 17 were deleted, 9 were not started, and 58 are still in progress, and 21 were deferred. And we've already sort of briefly gone over the changes in the status of the report, and Sheree is going to talk around the financial results and any proposed changes to dates, etc.
Great. Thank you, Sheree.
So as alluded to in the covering report under the issues section, there's a couple of things that I just want to speak to today. First point is around our infrastructure valuations. So we did have a number of delays with those key valuations for roading and water and waste this year. So we got them over the line in the end, and the results have been incorporated into the draft document. One of the key points that I wanted to note was we did have some issues with the asset data for the Three Waters valuation, and some further work was done by the water and waste team. However, to enable the valuer to complete their work. However, it's quite critical that we note that the valuer's confidence in the data has actually reduced from previous years. So I just wanted to bring that to your attention because it may actually give rise to some potential audit concerns around that matter. So yeah, they've basically dropped it from a 2 rating, stating that there's minor inaccuracies in the data to a 3, which they're saying 50% of the data is estimated across all the asset categories. So that's a key point for you to be aware of, and I guess I'm giving a heads up that it could potentially become part of our management report or other matters. A couple other items to speak to you in regards to building consent liability outstanding. So as you'll appreciate, as part of the building consent process, people come in and pay their $2,000 and something to get their consent, and that entitles them to a number of inspections. What happens is at balance date, typically not all those inspections have been completed. Now, historically, we have strongly felt that we haven't had enough data to be able to sufficiently estimate what that liability is. But given the work that the Building Solutions team have done over the last 12 months and focusing on some of those older consents and capturing them and following them up, we now believe that we've got some sufficient reliability around that data. So what that leads us to is we effectively need to recognise that liability on our balance sheet. So what we're saying is actually we've taken all this money off those people, but we haven't actually delivered that service yet. And so what has happened is we've got about $850,000 liability as at the 30th of June 2020. But the accounting standards also require us to estimate our liability as at June 2019. So we've worked through that process, and that does give rise to some of our comparative numbers changing. I've got my fingers and toes crossed that the auditors consider it not material in the scheme of things, but it may give rise to them getting their technical department to look at this issue. But I've spoken to a number of other councils around whether they recognise this liability or not, and it is common practice that it is recognised. So, and I think from council's perspective, it's a great number for us to have on the books and actually to be recognising that we have still got that liability outstanding.
So, mate,
Yeah, go for it.
Is that liability will reduce over time if some of that money is paid back or not?
Yes, but the other thing that you've got to be mindful of is as we reduce all the historic stuff, you also get, say, like the 2019-20 years inspections. Yeah, so I guess all going nicely, it should stay relatively stable. And to give you an insight, the movement from last year to this year was actually only about $10,000 or $15,000 because there's been a lot of clearance of the old stuff, but also picking up a whole lot of the new stuff as well.
Becomes a balance sheet issue about managing your liability. It's a really important, given what's behind it, it's an important management issue for building control and indeed affects our finances. Sheree, anything else you want to say at this stage?
Just also wanted to talk a little bit about, most of you will recall that I've done a few papers over the last 12 or 18 months around accounting for our other entities that we're involved with, such as Venture Southland, WasteNet, Milford Community Trust. So these accounts actually are the first year that we are 100% accounting for everything how it should be, and there has been a change in the accounting standards. So it was just to bring your attention to the fact that there is still a minor balance with Venture Southland. It isn't quite wound up yet. They've got their final audit coming up in the next month or so. But that balance is no longer proportionately consolidated under the new accounting standards. And also we are now recognising a share of the assets and liabilities of WasteNet in our balance sheet on a proportionate basis as well. So you would have seen some of the commentary in relation to the numbers reflects those changes in WasteNet as well. And I guess following on from that, we have got PwC having a bit of a look at some of those accounting disclosures, and also with the inclusion of the building consent and COVID disclosures that are requirements and stuff now. So yeah, we're working quite closely with PwC, and they're giving us some recommendations around improvements on those disclosures, and just giving us some comfort over our accounting treatment before we hit audit effectively.
And I guess we're just asking PwC to look at as part of that review function, because you'll remember the audit points from last year where the auditors said that they wanted to see that we had undertaken due diligence and reviews of the documents. So that's just another part of that step in that process that we used us to assist us with. And it also provides good support to the team for some of those issues.
Thank you for that. That's great, Cherie. What I'd like to do is we have another crack at this when we look to recommend to council that they adopt the audited report. But this is a reasonably significant meeting, nevertheless, for us to have a chance to influence how the document is actually prepared. So I do propose that we continue to devote a wee bit of time to this. And I'd like to do it in this way. Firstly, I'd like to just deal with the paper. I'd like us to go back to the technical issues, because I think it is important we just recognise what we are agreeing to there. I'd then like to go through essentially a section by section look at the draft annual report. And thirdly, I'd then like to come back and just confirm dates going forward, given one of the risks that was given us by our auditor was some stress in terms of delivery for very understandable reasons, but nevertheless, which might impact it. So I'd like to deal with it on that basis if the committee is happy with that.
So through the chair, does that include the question around the valuation comment?
Absolutely. That's first cab off the rank, actually, Gary, on my list. So yes, it's our chance to, I mean, there's a very good paper here that raises key accounting issues for us, Gary. So that's why I'd like to go through it first. Then we'll look at the annual report, and then we'll deal with how do we get this thing audited, NQA and what have you that goes with it. Okay. So look, shall I lead off with a couple of questions, but I'd be very keen that you make certain you folk have your questions. I would like to come back to that valuation issue where the valuers are saying they have reduced confidence in our data to a level of 50%. So there's an equal chance we've got it wrong as it is having it right. I'll be honest, that significantly worried me, and it worries me about how an auditor might view that. I guess I need to know a bit more about this before I can live with it. I'm sorry, it's a difficult problem, but this is a very significant problem that actually it's saying we don't have the data to know what our assets are and give a valuation more than a 50% confidence rating. Can somebody help me?
Let's just actually run to get Ian. Ian's probably the best
Poor old Ian.
person. I actually was having a quick look to see if he was still here.
I mean, this is critical because this is not just our valuation. This is also our depreciation number, but more importantly, it's about how do we manage the asset. And I know this is a valuer for valuation purposes, but the valuer has been asked to look at actually the data that we use that drives all of this. And in their professional view, it is, I'm going to say only 50%. Like I know a lot of the stuff's under the ground, but that worries me.
Well, we have known for years that we haven't had a full record of everything we've got, but there's been some work done to ensure that the work over the last 15 years has been recorded. So I'm actually shocked at an 50%.
Yeah. Sorry, Ian, get you back, man. Ian, that's okay. You're the smart man to have gone and come back without a time. Well done. Ian, we're having a I guess a nervous wobble here about the valuations that we have received on the three water assets. And the valuer, in terms of their professional duties under the valuation standards, has clearly looked at our asset records and has given us the so-called 50% confidence, or their 50% confidence rating in our asset data, which, as I characterised it, perhaps uncharitably means we could be equally wrong as we are equally right. Any sort of context or sense about how you viewed that statement from the valuers?
There was a certain value of assets that were still in work in progress because they weren't actually entered into our asset management system, basically due to a lack of resource.
So there were assets that we didn't even have on our books.
There were assets that we were aware of, but they weren't in the system. Yeah.
Okay. So did we have those valued previously? We just had some workaround in terms of our record keeping, or what?
They were in the work in progress file.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So they came through. So we were building them. They were sitting. Well, we may have built them some time ago. They were sitting inside our work in progress balance. We hadn't converted them to
probably
our.
a couple of years out. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Right. So this is suggesting, and I'm not having a crack at you, Ian, but this does suggest then that there are some internal process systems issues in having our asset database up to speed in terms of being up to date.
Correct. Yes. Something that we're working through at the moment, and we have plans in place to address that.
Right. Good. We might be keen to get what those plans are going forward. I certainly would suggest that for the long-term plan, but that's fine. So does that mean that we have some confidence that the value is still better than 50% because we have been able to provide the additional information to the valuer that gives them some solidity around it, as in contrast to their view about our asset management information?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Does Pete do the committee understand that? Our records are in different places, and ideally they are not up to date, but they still have the information. So we've been able, I think what you're saying in is we've been able to provide the valuer with all information to create a valuation. It's just that actually for the valuer, it's not in one spot called our asset management information system.
Correct.
Right? Can people, I mean, I'm serious, this is, it's pretty important. I'm just keen that you as elected members have the chance to test your understanding. There's no dumb questions, believe you me, to understand where we're at over this. Yeah, Don.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So as I understand it, the valuers suggested that the information that we have is not particularly, he's characterised as guesswork, is he? 50% is probably wrong.
On the surface, Don, I think that's what I first read into this. Okay, but I think what Ian is giving us advice on, I won't say necessarily assurance, Ian, but what Ian's giving advice on is that we have information in our asset management information system, but it's not complete. Okay, we don't have all the assets we use to operate our three water systems in that asset system, but we do have the additional required information elsewhere. So that if we provide all that information to the valuer, they have got a complete picture of our asset system and can therefore complete the valuation. I think that's, again, does that make sense, Don?
So in that case, the information is there, but it's in different places.
Yes.
So if that information was provided to the valuer, then would they gain more comfort from that and lift our rating to?
Well, I think we've given them. And this is what I'm just wanting to check about the actual valuation. The valuer's comments is that a valuer, and I, can I say, would expect that we have an asset management system that is up to date. He's saying it's not. And I think Ian's confirming that, and we've heard a suggestion about a need for an improvement program. Got to get some resource into doing that as being needed. But until we have that, we don't have it in the best state, the one that gives us the greatest confidence. John?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And just where we're heading with the 3 waters, it's probably more important than ever that we are on top of those valuations, because they will be used when it comes, I imagine, when it comes to transferring the assets to whatever, should that happen.
Yep, absolutely. We've already had the comment, though. And I were having a discussion the other night about shiny suits and ties that look like me coming in and saying, "Where's your asset register? I'll take those assets, thanks."
So the question, part of the question has to do with what time does it take to get the information that is not within the system into the system? So you've got this information in your raw something, at which point does it get into the system that we can actually see it?
I would say by the time that the next valuation comes around, we will be in a much better position. So 12 months time.
For 100%. I mean, a better position could be 10% more better, or it could be 40% better. So which level of percentage are we talking about?
Dependent on when we get the resources, I would say probably closer to the latter. So yeah.
Could I suggest, Abel, just for benefit, because
I think it's important.
it is. Can we hold this over to our risk discussion? Because what I'd like us to do is to, and John's already mentioned 3 waters as being a significant matter.
I was trying to look at it.
Yeah, agree. But what I would like to suggest is that under the risk discussion, we consider what assurance that we need going forward, so that we can engage when it gets to the pointy end of 3 waters discussion, which will include, I know, what improvements do we need to make to be able to go to the table to discuss things. And this will be centre and foremost of it. So if we could deal with it, Abel, I think that would be the good place to do it. Right, so we've got an understanding that actually the valuer hasn't given us a qualified opinion. I mean, he or she has still said the value is the value, but they have included in their report that they've only got 50% confidence in the asset management information system, correct? Right? Okay, so we have got a unqualified value that we have placed in our accounts. Have we engaged with the auditors on this yet?
No.
Can you do that? I know they're not here.
Yeah.
We need to raise this with them. If they're we've got to front load the issues. If they're going to have a crack, sorry, they're quite rightly going to look at this. Sorry, I should be careful how I use my terminology. They're quite rightly going to, let's warn them. Let's get the answer as quickly as we can. Otherwise, we'll be adopting this in December. Okay. Right, accounting for other entities. I didn't have any questions on that because, Sheree, you're quite right. You've given us about 27 gazillion papers over the last 12 months dealing with it, and it just makes sense. In other words, simply the view that we need to take about what is the scope, reach and size of Southland District needs to be reflected in our annual report, and consequently the adjustments that you brought through in terms of those other entities. I still think looking at the draft numbers relatively minor. Correct?
Yep.
Okay.
Correct.
So are there any questions on that, guys? We've talked about the uncleared inspections and in essence an issuance of the Code of Conduct Compliance Certificate that actually you've now helped us account for appropriately, which is this adjustment that we are talking about going through. So let's just reflect. What we are doing is saying we cannot claim to have received revenue if we haven't performed the service. Okay, so hence we've got a liability. And the liability is that we have to provide a service before we can say that, even though the money's in our bank, which it is, we can't say it's ours to use until we have delivered the service, right? So it is a real cost that we have to manage, and ideally subject to what is reasonable in any one year to have overhanging into the next year, managed down. So if we're taking a view of our balance sheet, this is a liability. I mean, I agree that we've got it in there, sure is what I'm saying. It's actually something that we actually proactively with management need to keep our eye on, okay? Not a big one, but it's still nevertheless pretty, sorry, remind me of the numbers. It's about
3,288 consents roughly, but that
Yeah.
number I think has actually decreased.
Yeah, I think
that was as at 30th
it's
of
moving.
June.
It's moving. I mean, we've had discussion around the table here before about unfinished CCCs. It's a big issue around the sector, as you quite rightly say, but we are recognising that it actually has a financial impact as well. So folk are happy. We haven't recognised it before, but you've made an adjustment. It's called a prior period adjustment. Heaven help us. And we've now got that in our box, which makes sense. Okay, cool. The other thing which I think is important just to mention, and you know the notes here, and I think you've alluded to it, Anne, is that the quality control we've put over these accounts now has included a separate review by PwC, correct? Do we have their views on this yet?
We've got some informal commentary come into my inbox this morning.
Right.
Yeah.
So it may be that when you look at this, and including perhaps my sort of, I could be a bit worried here about the valuation. Are you going to talk about that with PwC?
So PwC would basically got them just to look at
The face accounts.
technical-
Okay, cool.
technical
Yeah,
issues.
with you.
Yeah.
Okay, no, that's fine. Well, what I think that's I mean that is about to say belts and braces, but that's good that we've had that technical review, which gives us a sense of quality. Right, look, sorry, those are my big questions about that. Are there other questions on the paper, short of the dates that people want to raise? No.
Well,
Paul, go
they're
for it.
not issues, they're just, I'm better with words than with numbers. I notice on page 55, we talk about a few inquiries. I think it should be with an E instead of an I. And on that same...
We'll come to the annual report. You're into the annual report. We're not quite there yet.
Sorry.
We'll get there. We'll get there in a couple of moments.
Oh, sorry.
Can I just ask one question, which is slightly off piece, if you will, but nevertheless is relevant. And I just wanted to go back to page 39, where we explain in a very helpful statement, really some of the movements in revenue and expenses. And in my very quick, simple reading, and I'm open to being corrected here, Anne or Cherie, we have a number of one-off revenue items sitting in our revenue line, and we have some additional costs being added to our expenditure line. Most or a good number of those expenditure items are systemic. They are built-in costs that we have taken on board in contrast to the revenue, which is one-off. Have we aligned this up with our financial strategy going forward? And it'd be part of the LTP, but I'm just wanting to reflect here. When I look at that cost structure, we've added to our cost structure, but we don't have the revenue necessarily. Have we thought that one through?
So that will definitely be taken into account while we're reviewing our
Yeah.
LTP.
Can I just reflect on that? This annual report should be a check for us against where we are with our existing financial strategy, even though you're going to have an LTP discussion around that as well going forward. Okay, cool. Look, if there's no other questions about the actual paper, thank you. It's a very helpful paper. Can we then go to the annual report? And look, yeah, Paul, you've got some questions, so welcome to your input, please.
Yeah, there's that inquiry one, and on the same page we talk about at the second bottom line up to 193 old wooden bridges, and I'm just wondering if that terminology isn't that good. If we should say pre-whatever, it just looks like an admission of failure. We start saying we've got old wooden bridges. We've got a number of things around this building that are old.
What page on?
Some of them are speaking.
55.
Page 55,
yes.
second bottom line.
If we could just use the agenda paper references because we've got competing numbers.
Page 10 of the...
No, use the agenda number just so that we know where we are. So it's page 55 of the agenda, second bottom line on that page. Abel?
I just think that description could be a bit more flattering. That's the one. It looks like we've sort of...
You want to say pre-1960 or something?
Pre some date or, something like that.
1860. Right.
And just one other small thing, and it's on page 73. We talk about the opportunities for Maori to contribute, and we talk on the progress we've got, even though we're talking about putting Tonga in various offices and what, the carving is in place. I think it'd be better to say a carving, or there is a carving, because it looks like it's the only one we're ever going to have, sort of thing.
Thank you, Paul.
That's all.
Right. So if we, if I just was to go back, I just want to ask the committee a question rather than Cherie and Anne and Shannon. Can I go back to page, where are we? Page 49 and 50. So this is Gary and Steve's summation of our year. No, actually, by the way, I don't have too much trouble with it, but I want to actually ask you as committee members, does this resonate with you? Is this how you would describe in a document where you are being accountable to the community, the key points? This is probably the one bit that most people will read. Does it capture?
Come on, the numbers.
Well, that's the other half of the world, but you know, this is the critical thing, and I'm just trying to put us to attention. Are you comfortable with what's being said there, without suggesting that you should be uncomfortable?
So what are you thinking, that this possibility we've concentrated too much on the two major events, which is flooding and COVID, and perhaps taken our eye off council performance?
Well, that could be the case, John. I mean, sorry, I'm not suggesting there are any gremlins in this. I'll make sure, if you ask it as a rhetorical question, that's a good question. I'm not offering a view here at the moment. I'm just offering that does this fit with how you want to be accountable to the community? Gary, we're just looking at your report. Sorry, and fairness to that, your name's being mentioned.
I can go back out.
No, we're just trying to reflect, Gary, whether this, you know, given this is probably one of the primary statements, quite frankly, that will be read, does this reflect how we want to be accountable for our year and what we've delivered to the community? Yeah, no, that's what I'm trying to reflect.
If I may, when I read it, I thought it was fine.
Good.
I just wonder now if we sort of gives the impression that the year's been totally defined by events which are outside our control, and perhaps we haven't sort of owned stuff that we have done that's in our control. Possibly.
Right. That's similar to what John is. Well, I think what John is saying. Yeah. Okay. So there's a reflection. Look, I don't think we're going to find the words here, but I'm just wanting to perhaps raise that as an issue, not an issue, as a factor for folk to consider. Yeah. Okay.
If I was a ratepayer that bothered to read it, I'd probably be happy enough with it. But it's a description.
Well, in that case, we don't need to spend too much more work, Paul, do we? Yeah.
But it probably might be an opportunity lost to
exactly
talk about some other things that we perhaps have achieved.
Yeah. Don?
And well, we had quite a significant jump in debt levels for this council over that year. I wonder if that's part of it.
Well, it could be.
I mean, you could have any number of different ways of reflecting.
A good opening will always say, this is what the year has been for us. What have we done? What have we delivered? It will say we are in this position, a good position to face the new year. We think these are the challenges that we will face in the new year. Now, I can see elements and aspects in there. So, I mean, I'm broadly comfortable, but actually, it's your accountability rather than mine. And I'm just saying, has it hit the mark? And this is our chance to have that. I think, for the sake of the meeting, this is not a workshop. Can I say, look at that again? I don't know when. Have a look at it again, please. And if there's thoughts that you'd like to particularly flow through to Gary and to Steve, this one would be worth just a week. If you had 5 minutes, this is the 5 minutes to spend on. Okay, good. Can we go to the next section, strategic direction? I had a question here, Cherie and Shannon. I think if I read correctly in the documents, there's a level to which we're still to try and drive our strategic priorities and outcomes with our performance, making that link. Is that correct? Or has it already been done? Or you're doing that still?
We were still finalising the wording of the identified effects on the community wellbeing. So
Oh, okay.
section 2.
Yeah, that's reasonably technical and pointy-headed. Yeah. Okay, gotcha. Okay, so the critical thing again in reviewing this, as I've tried to look at the activity statements, is actually, are what we're delivering actually advancing our outcomes? That's a very difficult assertion to make, but somewhere in terms of this report, we want to be able to be comfortable that it puts us in that sort of light on our assumption that we agree that we have. Okay, can I move over to the key highlights executive summary section? Is there anything here that we need to have? I had just wondered in terms of the response to the COVID lockdown, and this almost goes back to the point that perhaps John and Paul had made, some on page 55, okay, that it does quite well reflect the impact on the community, which is quite right. Oh, wait a second, I got this around the wrong way. Sorry, it suggested that actually that we have continued, which is good. And I just wonder whether we needed to acknowledge the impact on the community. It's us as the council and it's our constituents as a community that's trying to affect it. Just a small nod and acknowledgement I think would be good. Okay, can we go to the service statements or the activity statements? Sorry, no, actually we're in the overview territory. Is there anything in the overview, which again is the second most read part of an annual report? Once we got past the mayor's message, they're going to flick to somewhere like pages 60 and 61. Which has got the financial summary. Does that look okay? Question mark. It does to me, but I just was wondering, again, just trying to lead a wee bit of discussion here, if there is need for any. How does it look? It's simple. And we do follow it up with, indeed, the standard markers. So, Dawn, going back to things like we are with our debt, it does portray it graphically on pages well, it doesn't, this is not our internal debt, I must confess. Pages 63 through
To 67.
to 67, thank you. It does have that. Rightio. I did wonder on page 64, in terms of the debt affordability and the debt servicing benchmark, if I recall rightly, I look at the, what is it, paragraph 38 of page 39 that says we have $2.5 million in external debt. Correct?
Yes. Very much short term.
I couldn't see the green. Sorry, there is green there. Okay, sorry. There is green. Now that I've said that out loud, I couldn't see the green. Okay, sorry. Yeah, I might actually.
But yeah, as Anne alluded to, it was repaid in full on the 2nd of July.
Brilliant. No, that's good. But it still would, that modest green still would sit there. So I totally get your view. Rightio. Can we keep moving over? We've got the shared services statement. I think I then do, and we've talked about, you've talked about the fostering the Maori capacity and capability. We know the audit reports to come. So then perhaps I am wanting to see it, taking it as a group. Are there anything about the council activity statements which people would like to raise? So I'm taking all of them. It's about the next 100 pages. So I do recognise we need to keep moving on.
83.
Sorry. So I'm the council activity start on page 82. Is there anything there that this is where we've had already with the prior item with Shannon a pretty good discussion around the actual reported performance with perhaps one or two changes. We'll ask you to reflect on. Is there anything else that people want to raise about this? Just one minor point that I saw on page 89, Shannon. We talk about a section 17A review. That's good local internal jargon to local government people. But if I was sitting in the middle of, I don't know, somewhere in Southland, I wouldn't know what a 17A review was. It's good jargon, but we shouldn't have it. You could just do a check for that. Rightio. Anything else?
Just a very brief one. that comes up time and time again is under district leadership, we incorporate forestry. It's confusing for a lot of people. Why
Right.
do we do it? Why can't we take it in?
Okay, so just remind us the page you're on. You're right. I noticed that before, John. What
82.
page 82?
Through the chair, that in the 2018 LTP, they decided on the structure and the group of activities within the groups, and unfortunately, that was where that forestry was placed. I understand that Jason has gone through with you the proposed new structure of the council activities for the further LTP, which has it in a different place. So for the purposes of reporting for this 2018 LTP, it needs to remain where it is. So that's why it's in there.
Yeah, okay, so I accept that, but, you know, given the confusion it creates, can we not put it down as a discussion point, as a thing to do, because forestry is a significant activity in its own right. And, you know, and I'm proud of our forestry assets and the revenue it generates. But to have it almost hidden within district leadership, I think is doing it a disservice.
Can I let you tell you what it was? Can I say, John, I wouldn't support us trying to rework the accounts to have a separate activity item on forestry at this stage. Can I ask that you pick that one up in the LTP as well? It's again the logical time to work out how you have an efficient number of council activities. But could I ask you just to reflect, is there for this either a note or some point that could be brought out within district leadership recognising the importance of forestry in the way that John suggested, please? Okay.
Through you, Mr. Chair, there is some highlights on page 100 of the district leadership activity statement with a subheading saying our key highlights around forestry,
Yes.
talking about the level of harvest and that our revenues exceeded budget.
Yeah. Right. I sense we're not going to satisfy you this time round, John, but can I just ask that you just do that check, given John, to honour John's raising that as an issue, to see how that one may or may not be further highlighted. Okay, can we just keep going, guys? Is there anything else that people want to raise? I know it's difficult to take in all the data. I did have quite a close look at roading, given it's our significant asset base, which becomes really important to us. We've already talked about the road smoothness survey and other bits and pieces, which becomes useful. That's what I'd picked up there. So that's useful. Can I, and this is must be being sneaky, in that roughness survey, that's KPI 16.4 on page. This is page 124 of the agenda. We talk about the survey was carried out in 2019. Good results, exceeding our target 85. Note that Stewart Island Rakiura roads were not included. Now, they're not going to change that percentage significantly, even if they are the roughest roads this side of Timbuktu. Can we assert something about Stewart Island, please? I think it's wrong to not include them, isn't it? They've got some roads over there. Last time I was there, there were roads. Why can't we say something about them? Again, this is my point, that the measure probably is really effective, but why do we exclude good constituents? So it's outside the survey, but our systems say, and there won't be Fonterra milk tankers over there, I suppose, Gary, but you know, we're comfortable or whatever, however we've reached that assurance. Let's say it. Okay, sweet. Can you just help me?
So I'll just, why would you want that in there? Sorry. So we've got 100% cover of our road.
Yeah, well, it says, you know, if I go back to the fact that our gravel roads are at acceptable standards in terms of roughness. I mean, there are gravel roads on Stewart Island, right? Why don't we be accountable for the totality of our gravel roads? Why do we exclude Rakiura, Stewart Island?
Question I can't answer.
The document.
Yeah, so all I'm saying here is I think the response is being dictated by how we calculate the measure, Gary, which is fine. I don't have any trouble with that. And as I say, if we included 100%, if we said the length of Rakiura Stewart Island roads were rough, you know, that they were a negative result, I doubt it would move that percentage significantly at all. But why don't we just say something that's accountable rather than just saying we haven't measured them? Can we say that we have some understanding and know where they go? Again, it's like the fact that it's only 2 years that we do the smoothness survey. Becomes really important.
Excuse me. But,
Yeah, sorry, Julie.
how many gravel roads are there on the Stewart Island?
I'm asking it as a question. I've got to be honest, I'm not entirely certain.
Is there some?
Kilometre-wise, I don't know.
Yeah.
There's one.
Not significant anyway.
That's fit, minor.
Look, it probably is minor. I don't want to make it over the top, but I'm just trying to reflect. This is about our total accountability, which includes to our Stewart Island ratepayers, let alone the rest. Okay.
So should we just take that out, or just say that Stewart Island roads are assessed separately?
Well, I guess I'm going one step further and saying Stewart Island is out, but we are comfortable through our inspections, whatever it is that we do, that they're a satisfactory condition. Yeah, that's all I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
And
Mr. Chair, well, sure that's.
we'll do that.
They'll certainly have some assessment.
Yeah.
Even though it's just accountability.
Yeah. Because actually, we need to be comfortable that it's right, Paul. That's actually what I'm saying. It's not actually what we're right. We need to be comfortable that actually we're doing the right thing for the Stewart Islanders. Or indeed any community. Can I just check page 127 of the agenda? That last sentence sent me into an accounting tiz because I couldn't quite work it out. The decrease in reserves is a result of depreciation funding not being used to fund asset replacements. I've got to confess I'm asking a dumb question here, but I struggled with that statement.
127, sorry.
127 of the agenda papers. Can somebody help me? Perhaps you want to take me aside afterwards and tell me, Bruce, get your accounting head on and think about it. I can't work that one out for me. Can you work that one out, Ian?
I'm working it through the section.
Okay, I'm going to keep moving. If you guys can have a look at that,
Yeah.
I don't think. Oh, okay. Yes, I think you. Yeah, that's really good. I think somewhere we use NZTA. I think they generally are going by the name of Waka Kotahi solely now. So it would be.
Waka Kotahi New Zealand Transport Agency.
Oh, New Zealand Transport Agency. It would be good to recognise their full name, please. Okay, anything else, guys, that we're going? Wastewater was another one that interests me. Again, going back to the three waters. I do have a question about the accounting. Look, I just noted in the performance, Shannon, the median response time and resolution times for sewage overflows. And the first measure is between the time of notification and time when service personnel reach the site is 18 minutes. I thought that was phenomenal in such a dispersed council. Are our wastewater operators sitting almost on top of every system? Because that's what that almost suggests. That's an amazing time.
Pretty close to most of it.
Yeah, they are. Yeah, no, it's really my lack of knowledge here, Gary. Just
My
checking.
understanding is it comes up on SCADA, which comes up on their phone.
Yeah, that's a pretty good turnaround. I mean, we allow ourselves an hour, we're doing it in 18 minutes. It's pretty impressive. Some good land speed records. Hey, can we have a look at page 142, please, and Sherry? I've got a accounting question here. We have no finance costs associated with water and wastewater, yet we have use of debt. I'm thinking about going forward and actually wanting to reflect what is the cost of operation. I may need an accounting explanation outside this meeting. Why does it appear that way?
Effectively, because the interest that's charged is internal.
And you net that off.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
So, yeah, I think district leadership's the only one that'll show. I think it's $22,000 of interest that we've paid for the year, because all the other interest is internal.
So I'd like to reflect on that. I'd like you to reflect on that, because there is, in a sense, debt taken out, albeit internal. I agree it's not external, but for the creation, development, and maintenance of these systems, right?
Mhm.
I think it would be important, even if it's by way of note disclosure, that we reflect here what is the debt associated with these systems. And I'm thinking about Three Waters reform. I don't want some smart person coming down. Abel, you and I were discussing this and taking our assets, but not taking the debt that goes with it. For the ratepayer, the internal loans are real debt. They're paying it back.
My understanding is they will take the debt, so if we haven't shown it, we've got a debt.
Exactly. If we haven't shown it, we'll still have the debt, but they'll have our assets, and they've got the means to charge for the assets, and we haven't. So it is about trying to get a reasonable picture. So I know from an external perspective, we have no debt essentially, but from a perspective of being able to maintain these systems, we do have debt. So I'd like us to think about that one, please, Anne.
Yeah.
If it had chance to be in here, I think ideally it would be in here, but we're hoping we better get that right for the LTP and going onwards, because if we have change by 2023, we want our position to be fairly reflected and not.
And our assets and our liabilities.
You got it, John?
And-
Happy to give them the assets as long as they take the debt, man.
Yes, for sure.
Okay, can we just keep going, guys? I'm just conscious of time. Anything else? Water I've looked through, that's fine. Right. I take it somebody will do a grammar and spelling check through here, if that's okay, because I picked those ones up. I picked up a couple, but that's not a big important thing there. One of the important things for us, we looked at this before in terms of the papers, is the critical accounting estimates and assumptions on page 173 of our agenda. They all look pretty consistent with the discussions I've been involved in around the table, so I was comfortable. So page 177 onwards has what we would call the primary or the main financial statements. Do councillors have any questions over that? Cash flow is still to come, I think, even as of last night, so I don't think I saw
it is them in there and it works, but a couple of numbers I don't think.
I looked at it, but I thought you were still had it shaded. So okay.
Yeah, it is still shaded.
Right.
I've still got a double.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Look, I don't necessarily expect at this stage that we need to go through a full investigation necessarily of those numbers. But is there any question that people would like to raise at this point about those numbers? No. Look at that, and they're letting you off scot-free.
New number for me that I wasn't aware of was the total capital value of Southland District.
Yeah.
It came up to 21 billion.
Oh, and the rates note one, I think.
Yes, it's in the rates note.
Yeah.
Yeah. You happy with that, John?
Quite aware of that.
That's-
Can I just check one thing? I have tried to look at the numbers, Sheree, and again, no big drum, but I was looking at the funding impact statement, which is on page 183, 184 of the agenda item.
Yep.
And I looked at the actual spend on replacing existing assets at $17.9 million and thought about that relative to depreciation. Now, depreciation is 23. Just something to think about for the long-term plan. That given even what we've just perhaps heard around assets and what have you, I'm just wondering whether that's a good number. So what I'm trying to do here is saying that depreciation is is our assessment of what is the cost of using the asset for the year. As you know, with your bridges, you would ideally keep up with the bridges over time relative to their use. And so we have spent 17 million or 18 million, thinking of $18 million replacing assets, and yet with the cost that we are acknowledging this year for the use of them is 23. Now that could well be fully explainable, but from a strategy perspective, it becomes really important whether that $18 million is the right number or not.
And then that number of depreciation will grow as the percentage of assets we include in the register increases.
Over time, John, if it's a deficit there, if that was real, in other words, it's maintenance we should be doing but aren't, we are building ourselves a debt for a future generation.
So you would like to see closer alignment between our capital works and the depreciation decline.
Perhaps my sermon here, John, is actually it makes your infrastructure strategy and your financial strategy with the long-term plan really important, because that's what I'd be looking for.
So there's a couple of factors, of course, that's involved here, isn't
Yeah.
there? One is the depreciation rates or the lives of our assets.
That's right.
correct?
Yeah.
Which is always a bit of work that you're going through. And I suppose the second part is, of course, the lives of these assets
Yeah.
are between 80 and 100 years. So
Yeah.
you're not always going to get every year where your capital program.
Oh no, will
is
be
gonna
dollar for dollar. I agree entirely, and that's where we've got a snapshot here, John. The benefit of the long-term plan is you'll at least see it for 10 years. And if I was to see this for 10 years, I'd be saying, well, gee, there's a thickening of a $60 million difference there. That's quite a bit of service we could be borrowing from future generations to use now. Okay, can we just keep ticking away, please? A little question, Cherie, on page 186, which is the rates revenue notes. So your one, John, about the overall capital value. Can I just check? We've got no COVID impact on rates collected in 2019-20. Correct? COVID hasn't really impacted our rate collection.
No.
Okay.
No.
Good.
You'll recall that we said that we weren't going to put a overall policy on our approach to people dealing with financial difficulties as a result of COVID, and the level of inquiries have been minimal. So we said we'd deal with them on an individual basis. And the number of inquiries have been minor.
I know I should probably raise that under the debtors note, not the revenue note, but I'm just wanting to reflect. If we'd had an impact, we should be mentioning it here. The fact that we don't mention it here suggests that actually we're still in that position where the impact of COVID has not affected our revenue, either obviously raising our revenue, but more importantly, the collection of it.
So you're basically asking us is whether we've changed our doubtful debt provision.
Yeah, that's right.
Should we keep on?
Bottom of page 193, I just wondered about that remuneration, those two paragraphs around remuneration. It would look like the standard term wording as guidance out of the Remuneration Authority. Is that actually right? Correct? There might be a bit of tweaking there. Okay. Rightio. Okay. You can all see how much you got paid, guys. Sweet. Okay. No, we're still going fine, I hope.
Which isn't right either, because there's 20% taken off. Some of that.
Okay. Voluntarily?
Salaries over 100 were automatic.
Were they? Okay. Well, can we just check out? It's probably the second most important note read, by the way, Gary. So your points were made that we need to get that one right. Yeah. If we could just check that, please.
Just through you, Mr. Chair, that data was taken effectively from the payroll data, so it's based on what's physically actually been paid in that note.
So it is an accurate reflection.
Yes.
Okay, we just check that we got that one right. That'd be great. Can I just ask a question, please? It's pretty minor, really, but on page 202, where we list our assets, I was just interested in the balance of runways at $19,000. Is that our written down value of Te Anau and, I don't know, do we own the Rekiura one? Do we own the one on Shillong? We don't. So is that the value of the Te Anau runway? Residual value, 19,000. That's interesting. Page 202, Abel. If you look at the second last line of that top box, you'll see that the remaining value, written down value, is $19,000.
No, there is. Oh, that doesn't look right.
That suggests it's about a nanosecond away from the end of its useful life. That's good. We'll be able to have more subsurface drip irrigation. That'd be great.
So we don't revalue those. So just remember, we don't revalue those assets.
No.
So that is historical cost less depreciation.
Oh, that's historical cost.
Historical cost less depreciation. Yeah.
Yeah, well, okay, that raises an interesting question about the relevance of this valuation of the historical cost that's been written off.
Yes, so
Okay.
that's one of the suggestions.
Something to look at. Okay, cool. Sorry to be painful here. 206. Sheree, I had trouble with the insurance, that table around insurance of assets, where the total value of all assets that are covered by insurance contracts is $52 million, roughly. Maximum amount to which these assets are insured, 205. Can you just explain that for me, please? It's a dumb question. I should know the answer, and I don't. Sorry.
So effectively, that top value, so the total value of the assets is the written down value of those assets, and it's all the assets that we don't revalue.
Yeah.
So
Okay,
it's like
so,
all our buildings
yeah,
and stuff
gotcha.
that are sitting at
We've got them at
historical cost
replacement
less
value.
depreciation. So whereas they've been insured effectively predominantly at replacement value.
Yeah. Yeah. Brilliant.
We might just need to put some more note in there.
Just to, yeah. Well, look, sorry, sorry that I asked a dumb question, but hopefully that's helped.
No,
That's helped
that's-
with that. Okay. Well, I have some other questions, but I don't think they need worry the meeting. I feel like I've taken a lot of your time. But is there anything else that people want to raise? There is actually. Can we just go to page 227? So I've moved over quite a wee bit. 226. Note 34 is the impact of COVID-19 on council. No general trouble with the note. I'm just wondering whether it's buried in the notes. I wonder if this needs more prominence. I think it's a discussion I'd have with the auditors.
More prominence.
Yes, yes, somewhere near the front.
Because we effectively have to put some disclosure in
I
it from the requirements, and we opted to put, I guess, a bit of a summary of this in the key highlights section.
Yeah.
So that was our call, and I think we've alluded back to this, referring to more detail.
I'm not going to die in a ditch over this. I just want to reflect that we may well see an audit report from the auditors which refers to this note. That in itself is not a big drama because they won't qualify, I don't think, but it is something that will affect our accountability. Rightio, and just for the benefit of...
If I may,
sorry, Paul.
I just noticed 211. I've just noticed that there's quite a lift in our holiday pay accrual, which may be to do with COVID or I don't know. We have had problems with that in the past. Is that an issue that we need to be aware of?
So my understanding is that we have some indicators within the system that managers are followed up on. So if they've got staff that are breaching over, I think as Janet might be able to levels there. I think there's definitely a 40 days annual leave, isn't there?
We have 40 and over 25, but when you look at the corporate performance report, we can talk a little bit about it because there's some notes in there on those the corporate performance report about leave.
Yeah.
We have to definitely notice a little bit of a difference with COVID because people didn't take leave that they had planned.
Yeah. Janet, we could just note that and pick it up when we talk about that. Very good question. I mean, here's the value, Paul, of looking actually at these numbers. They mean something. And if we've got a liability, again, this is a case where people, not unreasonably, but have earned leave, but they haven't taken it. And we're going to have to be prepared to pay for it and not get the benefit of the work later. And just to note for folk, we had that discussion under Sheree's very good paper about the impact of not recognising all our building consent work. So page 227 is the adjustments that we've made to the accounts to get that recognition, that liability in there. It makes a lot of sense. Okay, that's fine. Right, is there anything else? I think actually that's almost got me to the end of them. It's been it's been too much of my voice, but this is our chance. Is there anything else that people want to raise before I just deal with the dates?
Back up the bus, sorry.
Yeah, no, Gary, go for it, Gary.
Back up the bus to page 190 where they've got the list of councillors.
Yep.
Fiona's just raised a point there that Brian Dillon didn't resign because he wasn't re-elected. and Neil Patterson didn't resign, he was re-elected. I wasn't elected, so I'm just re-elected, so I'm just wondering if that wording.
Yeah, I think it does, yeah. I thought you were being nice, but if they voted out, they voted out, so.
So we've got ones that
Not-
did not stand for re-election, they were elected, not appointed.
Yeah,
They didn't.
so just some clarity around what it is, yeah, not returned or whatever the right phraseology
Actually,
is.
not returned a good one.
Okay,
I wonder if Gavin McPherson should be noted as being on the district licensing committee too.
in terms of his role. Okay,
Oh, yeah, he was till, election time.
yeah, I think this is a wee note, we just want to have a bit of a sweep through again, just to check that the accuracy, please, and there are a couple of notes here that need to be just worked on, which is superb.
So just through the chair, just for advice on this, should we put something in there about the remuneration authority taking off 20%, anything over 100,000 for 6 months or until February 2022?
Yeah, I think somewhere it is well worth putting that in there, so it's recognised. Yep, absolutely. I think it should be recognised. Good note, disclosure.
Yep, well note that.
Don?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Sorry, back to page 64, the debt affordability. Debt is a percentage of total revenue.
Yep.
Is that correct? That green is about 0.2%, but I thought the debt level had popped up to about 20%, the external debt.
I don't think that's true of external debt. This is the debate we had, Don, about internal debt and how do we reflect that actually we do our ratepayers are paying off debt. It's just the majority of the debt that we do have is we've borrowed from ourselves to enable schemes to be built. And those scheme holders are paying back to Southland District for that debt rather than say a bank. Okay,
so that's not
but the point is for, because these are well, actually the way in which the external world looks at us is that they don't really care that we borrow off ourselves to build something. They want to know, has the external world provided us with money? So they talk about this idea of net debt, and we don't have any, apart from $2.5 million, which is that little minor green stuff there. In the views, in the eyes of the world, we don't have external debt other than that $2.5 million, and that's what we've got to report on there. But you should.
It's not net debt either, is it?
Well, no, not for that calculation. Sorry, good question, John. I think it's only that's gross debt, which is the 2.5 mil.
Yes.
Because if it was, net debt would be we're actually positive because we've got investments in hand. Okay. Right, thank you for that. That's been somewhat long, but it's been pretty exciting. It's been a great ride, hasn't it? You want to all become accountants, oh, Julie?
Going back to page 135 and looking at the comments at there, how we did the key highlights. A lot of that, to me, what we did was we upgraded the stormwater pipes in Winton. It's sort of round the wrong way, if you like. I mean, I know that those other things are important, but like they're talking in there about in July 2020. Well, wasn't this for the previous year? Am I wrong? Like I said, is it all? Are we talking about stuff that happened in the appropriate?
Yeah, I hear your point. This is raising strategic issues as in contrast to what we have actually delivered or maintained for our communities, right? So I think it is important to probably recognise the strategic challenges that are there. But I think Julie's very worthwhile point is actually we should start with what we have done. Which I think is actually a really good point. So that might be something to reflect on for the other key highlights. Thanks, Julie. Is there anything else you needed to raise? No? Rightio. So there is still a bit of homework there, and one should never leave council with homework because you're no different to me. It's difficult to actually return to it. But we started by looking at Gary and Steve's opening remarks. I'm making a modest suggestion that people tend to read that. Can I ask that you look at that again? If there's anything that particularly you think, well, actually, I don't know whether it's putting us in the best, in the most appropriate, which is generally accurate and factual and transparent light. Can you let Cherie? Shannon.
Yeah.
Thank you, Shannon. Sorry, Shannon. No, that would be absolutely great. Can we look at the dates, please, then, for where to from here? We've had a big crack today. What's our next engagement, please? And what are the risks around that with the auditor?
So you'll recall, hopefully, in the memo that you saw that went out last night, is that we've been approached by Audit New Zealand this week. They are having significant issues with resourcing, and you'll recall when we discussed the audit plan with Derek Olsen, the audit director, on Zoom, he did allude to that this potentially could be an issue. As you're possibly aware of, Audit New Zealand typically get a lot of their resource through their busy periods from overseas, which effectively they're unable to do this year. So we have been working with Audit New Zealand over the last day or so, trying to get some agreement, because as you'll appreciate, they were due to start on Monday coming up. So I was chomping at the bit to go, are you going to be here? What's happening? And yeah, they've come back to us and actually advised that they don't have the resource to be able to start next week. They're looking to defer the start date by 1 week, but actually looking to extend the period of time that they complete their audit work from 4 weeks to 7 weeks. So they are prioritising their work at the moment and prioritising their resources, and effectively they're going, we need a wee bit longer in order to be able to sign off. They have indicated to us that they would be able to provide clearance on our audit by Friday the 6th of November, which would effectively mean that we would be able to adopt the annual report at the scheduled council meeting on the 18th of November. But noting that we don't have a Finance and Audit Committee meeting prior to that 18th of November date. And typically it is your responsibility as the Finance and Assurance Committee to endorse that report to Council for adoption. So I guess there's a couple of items for consideration, is actually whether this time frame is acceptable. Whether there is capacity for a finance and audit meeting, and we've had a bit of a look at the calendars to try and fit it in with when you're already here for other meetings on the 10th, 11th or 12th of November. And also just recognising, and I guess, and this was quite a detailed discussion that we did have with Derek at the time of considering the annual plan, around the fact that it is an LTP year and that we have got resource on deck that are needing to work on the LTP. So I guess ideally we would have liked to have a clean cut. Here's the annual report, we're doing it, it's audited, we're finished, and then we're moving to the LTP. What this amended proposal is effectively saying is that we're going to effectively be juggling wrapping up the annual report with working on the LTP and recognising the risk, probably more so from a staff perspective, of managing those two key projects all at the same time. An adoption of the 18th of November will still be within the legislative requirements. So there was an extension this year as a result of COVID. So councils have till mid-December to adopt their document. So we will still be well and truly ahead of that. But yes, close to a month after we were initially planning for adoption.
Thanks, Cherie. Appreciate that. So yes, there's changes there. If you wanted a very quick reference, go back to page 19, which is actually last meeting's minutes, where there is a table on page 19 which shows what we did adopt as being the audit or the annual report program. It means that looking at that for September, the Audit New Zealand on site's now the 21st of September. It means that the first item under October for Audit New Zealand completing the audit is now the 30th of October, if it's 3 weeks out from the 9th. It means that we get verbal clearance from Audit New Zealand on the 6th of November. Tentatively, it means that we as a committee will hold a meeting with the agenda item being to adopt the annual report. It would appear possibly the 10th of November. It may be within 1 or 2 of those days, but we will do that so that council on the 18th can adopt the audited report. Okay.
Probably be good to have it then because they're all in on the 11th.
Yes, personally would like it on the 10th, but I'll let that now that I've put my bid in, I'll let that one work through. So we've got to town our wastewater PSG that day, Abel, so it would all fit in. But it does mean that week we need to do our work, which previously we'd anticipated about 2 or 3 weeks earlier. And look, I do note, Cherie, the challenge for councils that actually, would love to be totally focused solely on the LTP. Unfortunately, everybody's been aware that this is a risk and it's come home to roost. So I hope we can all do this with all good grace. We'll be testing.
So
Right.
So it's quite important that we do. Is there any extra resources required?
Thank you. Good call, Gary. Yeah. Can we, Anne, Cherie, there's a really good, that's the best question I've heard all day. Gary, can we help? What's the story?
Well, we're actually just working through with Anne around, our work plan around the LTP, because as you'll appreciate, we'll have community meetings and stuff coming up that will coincide with that. The other thing that we'll need to work through with Audit New Zealand also is just ensuring that they commit to planning to who they want to speak to and when they need to speak to people. Historically, it's a little bit ad hoc. They're just here and they rock up and say, hey, Cherie, can I talk to you about this? Or, hey, Susan. We're just probably going to need to refine that process a little bit more and encourage them to be a bit more definitive about when they need to speak to people.
And of course, we do have to remember it's not just our team that's affected.
No, that's
So
right.
I don't know, Mr. Caper may want to make some comment in regards to the overall.
That's putting the pressure on everybody.
We'll just have to do this. But once we get confirmed with what the commitments are, the dates, etc. Cherie made a good point that, I mean, it's LTP that is probably, because it's the same people, and especially that month of October, which is the community board, a lot of the community board engagement and consultation around LTP is happening at that time as well. So we'll come back to you as required.
Right, can I, Cherie, Rex, and can I take it that's a very supportive comment from Gary that I think would be endorsed by the committee that would encourage you to complete that planning. And as you said, Gary, you should come back to us if there is some adjustment needs to be made so that we can try and help you guys deliver. No two ways about that. So thank you for that question. Could I move to the recommendations, please, on page 34 of the agenda? And Fiona's given me some suggestions that we need to change a couple of things. So A through C remain the same. So essentially we do receive and we have complied with the Act. D is going to become a shorter, or the suggestion is a shorter recommendation, endorses the draft unaudited annual report for the year ended 2020. We've had a good discussion. We don't need to note that there are amendments. We know that's happening. E also is shortened to say approves release of the draft unaudited annual report for the year ended 30 June 2020 to Audit New Zealand. But to be honest, we also need F, because this allows us to actually adjust that between today and when actually it gets released. So F is that we delegate to the chief or acting chief executive to approve any further amendments to the draft unaudited report for the year ended 30 June subsequent to this meeting. And I'm going to suggest and prior to the final review by this committee when it recommends adoption. Okay, so that's just enabling the annual report or draft to have its changes made. We're asking Steve / an acting chief executive to pick that one up, and we'll have another crack on it seems like the 10th of November. So I'd like to move that motion. Put all those motions. Sorry, Paul.
It's a silly question. This committee's got the mandate to approve the release to Audit New Zealand.
And that, Paul, comes from, you know, that the general principle, our role is to maintain and manage the relationship with Audit New Zealand, our external auditors, indeed our internal auditors as well, but also to have we have that authority over the external accountability. So yes. So I'm going to put those motions slightly worded, differently worded, but still I think achieves the same thing. If you're with me, thank you, Abel. Can I put the motion, please? All those in favour, please say aye. Those against? Thank you. It's carried. So you didn't even know you're having such fun that we've gone past morning tea, so we can't have morning tea.
Well, we can smell it.
When you come back, please, let's take, how long do we normally take? I never
You
remember.
didn't have them back at 11?
Have it back at 11, a quarter of an hour. Seems like, can
I
we,
don't have my bell with me.
we are going to be moving straight into item 7.5, which is the quarterly risk management report. Thank you. Thank you very much for the morning so far. It's been great.
With your
No, I don't think
and
it would be. It wouldn't be an AV. Just to summarise it, John. I think we should go page by page. I'm glad you're smiling, Gary. I think it might be. Anyway, can we please, firstly, again, thank you for the morning. I've indicated that we're straight into item 7.5, which is on page 247 of your agenda papers, which is the interim performance. Oh no, 7.5, 40 risks, sorry, I'm on 7.4. There, I'm not under control of myself, let alone you. 7.5, page 283, sorry, of the report, 40 risk report. So Jane, I suspect we're in your hands, please. Thank you.
Thank you. So good morning, Mr. Chair, good morning, councillors. So the purpose of my report is to present the September quarterly update and risk register for your consideration. So Council's top risks for the July to September quarter have been reviewed by the executive leadership team, and their assessment, along with any changes in medications or thresholds, have been detailed in the report. I would like to highlight that following the risk reporting last quarter, we've continued to use the risk status just to capture where aspects of a risk are still being impacted by the ongoing COVID pandemic. So these risks continue to have a watching brief in place. There's only one risk threshold that's changed this quarter, and that is a decreased pre-mitigation from risk 1. No emergent risks have been identified for this quarter, and as per usual, following this committee meeting, any risks that are assessed as high or very high will go on to be reported to council at its September 29th meeting. So thank you. I'm happy to answer any questions you have.
I think, Jane, appreciate that, and it's again appreciate the strong lead. Can I open it for discussion? Would councillors choose to ask any questions? Paul, I think that's your hand up. Is that right, man?
No.
Well, you can ask a question anyway, actually.
Aristotle that we were
Good. Are there questions for? I hate to say it, I've got a few, so I could crack in, but I'd like to hear from you guys first, please.
If I may, just I was interested in the comment by management that there's no emergent risks at all.
Yep.
It's just.
That was my first question. Go for it, man.
Everything's hunky blue and everything's monitored. I'm just a little bit concerned that there's nothing coming to us at all that we should get. So, Three Waters.
Yep.
Any kind of financial implication? Service deliveries.
Good.
Yeah.
So, Jane, if I've got this correctly, the top 10 had been confirmed by ELT.
Yes.
But in their process, there was no suggestion that there were any other emerging risks.
Not this quarter, no. We
No,
haven't had
not this.
anything identified this quarter. We've been doing a lot of work looking at the 2 new risks that have joined the top 10.
Yeah.
Nothing has been highlighted for this quarter at present.
Emergent risk is 4.3. So something in the future. Is there something that's coming towards us that we should be concerned with?
May I just make one comment? So risk 4 has got the RMA reform requirements that have been highlighted within that risk. So we had been indicated that there was going to be risks coming, but that was in the previous quarter. This quarter we've actually filled that out, including the RMA reform work that's about to hit us as well.
Right, could let's cut to the chase. Three Waters is an increasing issue for us. We've already had a discussion this morning about the performance, with the suggestion that actually, if the indication from the valuers is correct, we need to get our data into place. We had a discussion under the annual report about looking at actually how we are portraying the real cost to the ratepayer for our assets. And it's an extent issue that while if I think correctly here, we signed the MOU, correct, and we've taken tranche 1 money, or will take tranche 1 money. We're clearly going to be engaged in the future in a matter which is potential to change the face of this council, let alone our colleagues around the country.
What about the delivery of the renewable opportunities? Is there any concerns here? Are we on track? Just
Perhaps I can comment, Mr. Chairman. Firstly, on Three Waters, I think it's a useful discussion to have about is it actually a risk or an opportunity? And particularly because you're talking about strategic risks. Now, yes, Three Waters could fundamentally change the role of local authority, of territorial local authorities, indeed, which could lead to broader change about the way of local government sector as a whole in the future. Now, whether that's a risk or not, or actually an opportunity, I think is a useful discussion to have, because I would certainly characterise it as the latter. Because the risk says that you're potentially unhappy with going down and exploring that direction. And this council, by deciding to opt in to tranche one, has actually said it's an opportunity to explore ways of doing things better and differently. Now, when you get into that process, yes, risks issues may emerge, but at the moment we haven't got into it in any great depth, and there's a whole lot of work. So, as I said, I'd categorise it as an opportunity, not a risk. Well, but having that.
Yep, that's fine. Yeah, no, it's good. It's good. This is why we have the risk discussions. So,
yeah.
Sorry, I think have you got a point to make, Jane?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I was just going to comment that we have captured one aspect of that risk within risk 8 in terms of difficulty retaining staff, that we've actually looked in terms of the uncertainty of the future role in TAs and service provision means that we can't undertake strategic planning regarding our staffing levels, then affecting service levels. So an aspect of that risk has been captured, but yes, further work can be put in that space.
Abel, you had a point.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are significant opportunities. Don't disagree on it. I think there's some, as you say, some opportunities, some more benefits, but there are some risks within that as well. We have to work with other councils, other bodies, other organisations. I think there are strategically some risks that we should actually identify, but if it doesn't go according to plan, there are some potential risks.
And I think so I don't think, I think we wouldn't all have a cutting two here. I think, Steve, I think we would agree with you as well. It's a good opportunity. I think the risks that we were exploring this morning as we considered the annual report, the valuers' critique of our asset information, some advice from Ian about where we are with our asset information. The risk is, are we ready to enter the debate and grab the opportunity? And I think we're just trying to reflect it would be useful for that sort of, in a sense, stock take, if I can call it that. I wouldn't use that word this morning. Would be valuable. Are we ready for the debate to grab the opportunity? I think that would be where I want to characterise the sort of the loose ends of the discussion we had this morning.
So I would probably characterise the issue then as actually not about Three Waters, but about the future delivery of local government services across the bottom of the South Island. That's actually the debate. It's not actually about Three Waters. It's about the future delivery of local government, which has been a core part of this council's strategy in terms of trying to understand what that means for quite some time. Three Waters is just one of aspect of that much bigger broader debate.
And that's related to content.
Along with RMA, along with a whole bunch of other issues about sustainability of the sector that which are significantly reflected in the risks already and the sustainability of this organisation. That's actually the risk, which is, as I said, the significant degrees reflected in there, which you might want to reflect, and I wouldn't reflect it as a risk, I'd explore it as that whole future local government in Southland, bottom of South Island. It's an awareness. We need to be aware.
And part of that would be perhaps the understanding that as Three Waters comes in, the communities are further removed from the provision of these services. So there'll be greater distance between them and the provision of the water to their homes.
It could
So
be
less
just another
representation.
It could be just another provider. Their provider could be different provider.
Well, we won't be the provider.
And look, I think that's a valid concern, but there is opportunity to influence the design of these entities and the statutory frameworks within the way in which they're set up to address those issues, those concerns. It is clearly highlighted as one of the critical issues to work through is how does that liaison relationship between communities and consumers, which can be quite different.
That's right.
Because again, off the top of my head, only 65% of this district is connected. So there's another 35% that isn't. How does that 65% engage with whatever the new entity is? How does it ensure that the voice of the issues that are of concern to this community are heard through that process? That's clearly an issue that's on the work program for at the national level, and is an issue that will be on the work program in the joint regional work that this council has previously agreed to do with Otago and the rest of the Southland region.
The risk is if you're not at the table.
Sorry?
The risk is if you're not at the table. Yeah.
Well, I think, look, I agree, although I'm wanting to push it, Rex. The risk is that we are at the table, but we don't know where we're at.
It's not our table.
No, I'm talking not just Three Waters.
Yeah.
I'm talking
No,
local
okay.
government.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I'm like there's that many other reforms that are either underway or ready to actually be underway.
Fair point.
And not just in local government, but across public sector.
Yeah.
That is the last time we had this with Rogernomics, late 80s to mid 90s.
Yeah.
Where health, State Centres Act has just been passed, replacing the old public service that topping central government agencies on their head.
Yeah.
And how they work and how they're going to work. We're part of that, whether we think we are at local government, way down here in the bottom of the South Island, we are part of that. So if we are not at the table and we have our head in that's not going to happen to us, that's the risk.
Agreed. So, Jane, this says that, I'm not trying to cut it off too quickly, but there is a sense from the committee that there is a matter here that needs to be explored. Now, I'm conscious that your strategy, your policy committee, this will be being explored somewhere else. So the critical point is there aspects of this that this committee should be seeking to monitor and reach assurance that we are, that there is there a risk there that we should be managing through what I'm trying to say? Can I say, I think that with the lead of the committee, I'd like to encourage Jane, senior sponsor our risk management. Can you have a consideration about whether that is the case, please, for us here at this committee? I don't want to cut across strategic thinking and what have you that's happening elsewhere. But through your question, does this committee have a need to assist by giving assurance over the risks that are associated with it?
But just be careful on what that label is. So I agree with Mr. Rue, we can't label as Three Waters as the risk.
No. And as Fran said, RMA is deeply affecting your area, which is starting to then go to the point you're making, Steve, that this is actually what is Southland District Council, what is local governments in the future. So I think it would be a valid point when we start with that aspect, Jane, actually then for us to identify it's certainly a major matter the next 2 to 3, 4 years.
Through Mr. Chairman, the Community and Strategy Committee actually started to discuss this on Wednesday. Council Byers raised the feedback on Peter McKinley's article and the future role of local government. So when you talk about that strategic and strategy area, that's where it started to be incorporated into that strategic issues and full wellbeing's paper that committee gets every meeting. And Councillor Byers actually picked up on that in terms of initiating that, started that discussion on Wednesday.
So look, I perhaps in fairness, Jane, to everybody's sensitivities paragraph, we got to this ultimate paragraph 16 on page 285. Perhaps what we're wanting to reflect is we sense an emerging issue. And therefore we're trying to work through what is the way in which we pick this one back up.
We'll certainly put some work into that.
Thanks, Abel. Appreciate that. That's a good point. Are there any other comments or questions that you'd like to raise for Jane and the team? Yeah, Paul.
I'm just sitting here thinking, and I don't suggest that it's a top 10 perhaps issue, and it's easy to pull out all sorts of things out of a hat that might have effects on us, but you mentioned climate change in terms of our infrastructure, but I'm just thinking of likes of our forestry, looking at what's going on in California and all that sort of stuff. If we should just think a wee bit more about implications of that sort of thing. It's been predicted after those fires in Nelson last year that the Otago forest could be at risk, and I'm thinking Waikato is in the same type of sort of climate, and just what we would do if there was a decimation as a result, or if there was some, risk to safety as well. You could spend a whole lot of time thinking up solutions and all the rest of it, but I just think it's something we shouldn't ignore.
Thank you, Paul. So, in other words, have we identified the full effects of climate change rather than just putting it to this one major risk that we've already identified?
Yeah. I think it's coming faster than we think, and more extreme.
Thanks for that comment. Any other question points from Gary?
Just item 15, risk 1, inaccurate data leads to bad decisions. I said it's decreased from very high to high. I'm just wondering after the conversation this morning whether the ELT might consider keeping that at very high.
Good question. So are we comfortable we're in control, or sorry, that's a dramatic question on my part.
I'm suggesting the ELT might consider.
Yeah. Okay, that they take on board the feedback. And I think, Jane, that also reflects the discussion we just had about let's call it the emergent issue of local government, and it's a sub-theme we've had, which is are we ready to talk and be party, which suggests we therefore have good data. And there's a question, there's perhaps a question mark just in our heads as governors about the state of where we're at. Any other questions for Jane, Steve, or Joe? Yes, Don.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just sort of related to Councillor Duffy talking about climate change, is that something that, and we've got coastal villages, is that something that should be on the?
Well, we're taking advice here from ELT as to in relationship to the big risks, or the top risks that we identified previously. I think Paul has asked the question, are we thinking embracively? And I guess I'm treating this as we're giving some advice back in the presence of the room today to the ELT to check. So I think that's consistent with what I think you're asking. Does that make sense, Tom? Yeah. We're asking the ELT to reconsider.
The risk about natural events covers that coastal villages.
Yeah.
Aspect.
Yeah. Effectively, it's about infrastructure, but it's with I think you're asking the community impact as well, which is fair enough. I'm sure actually ELT have been thinking about that, by the way. So it's a question about have we either characterised this risk correctly, or in the next iteration should there be a new risk? And if the top 10 risk, does it bump one off? Okay, that's fine. Jane, can I just ask a question, please? I take it I'm looking here at page 286. So that's the operational risk assurance portion of it.
Yes.
I take it that we are developing an operational risk register, which is what it is. So I don't want to make it a big question. So how do we know we are managing operational risk now? Because the register obviously is something of a conduit around which you would logically, manage risk. We haven't got it. How are we managing risk, operational risk?
Yes, sorry, Mr. Chair. This is an evolving piece of work. The operational risk register will be worked upon and come through. At the moment, we are relying, I think all of the ELT are aware it's not a perfect process.
Yeah.
And we are trying to keep a balance between what we are presenting within our ELT risk register, that at the moment you don't see that, but that is quite a mix of operational risks as well as strategic risks. You only see the strategic, but we're sort of monitoring it through that ELT level on a quarterly basis, but we are relying on the operational risk management report from the CEO each quarter to come to you. It is not the ideal situation. It is a piece of work that we are continuing to progress.
I'm not certain, by the way, that we need to see the operational risk register.
No,
I suspect that's quite big. I'd love to have some assurance that we have it and we're doing it. And that's why I asked the question. So my presumption is without the risk register, we have a workaround, which is giving us the confidence that actually we've generally got our operational risks in hand.
You see, I think we were trying to cover it off in paragraph 19. Where it's something that the group managers are working with their particular group managers in that space, and that assurance is there. That assurance comes back through with the ELT, and that's where it gets sort of a sense tested for one of the people.
Thank you. It's very helpful. Okay, can I just look at Gary? You raised very good questions around one, so I won't repeat that. I probably want to ask members a rhetorical question. Okay, so you can debate it if you want to, but it's actually more. I just want to leave it to you. I was interested in risk 2, Jane, which is the under investment in infrastructure, and this to me is really timely because you're doing the LTP. So this is about strategy and what is your appetite for risk? Which really, I guess, what my key point is: have we considered how we define risk? And I couldn't help but read the stuff, for instance, around bridges. It's what is it, a $40 million problem, Steve? I don't know what it was. And actually, we have already defined a level of risk or an appetite for risk approach to that because of how we're approaching it. And I'm just trying to reflect here. We had that discussion, and it's on simplistic numbers of depreciation versus renewals. If you aren't going to renew necessarily, and it's a very crude number as we've agreed, and what's the plan? And are we happy that that plan is enough? It's a bit of a rhetorical question for here, and I don't want to divert us given the rest of the report. But we need to answer that question as members in the course of this long-term plan. Anybody want to comment on that? Steve, looking at me thinking, where's Robertson going? I'm pretty relaxed.
Or take the risk away by adjusting the levels of service to the level you are prepared to fund.
Thank you. You've got right to the point. That's exactly my point. Is actually your appetite for risk determines the amount of money you're prepared to take out of the community. And if you aren't prepared to increase investment, which, you know, a crude barometer, a crude barometer says that we might not be, you're obviously prepared to take a risk position that you won't, that you either will have systems fail, or that actually the future and probably future generations will pay for that. And you've got to, internally, you've got to answer that question in the coming months. And there's an appetite question here I'm left with an appetite question, Jane, when I read that. That's the value of actually seeing this. Yeah, John?
Yeah, so, you know, of all the assets that we manage, you know, I see bridges as being the highest risk in that should there be a catastrophic failure, that is the one that could impact on us as negatively as any of the assets that we have. So the question is our asset register and our asset management of bridges at a level that gives us an assurance that we can say hand on heart, these are the top 5 bridges that are at risk of failure, therefore we have to do something about them, or we take action to close them. To give our resident ratepayers assurance that when they go to drive over a bridge, even though it might be an old bridge, they know they're going to get safely to the other side.
Good hanging question. Does anybody want to comment on that?
The answer is no, you can't. No, you can't. You've clearly said, and the direction we're getting from council at the moment is you're not prepared to get to a level that provides that assurance, which is why you raised the question, why I quickly jumped in and said, so you've got to adjust the level of service.
Yeah.
Now, council will make that decision in a very formal way through the LTP, but at the moment, no, you can't. Very clearly. You've got the data that says that.
So there goes. Thank you, Steve. Then John, there's another long-term plan question. Your risk framework has got to drive some of your thinking. I feel like I'm telling you because I'm part of you guys, but can you see some of the questions that are valuable here? Because there's another valuable one here on page 296, which is risk 9, overcommitment and work program, which Jane, you're still saying is worsening. And I think from Karen, we have the list of projects not completed.
Yes, certainly over this quarter, we still assessed as high the impact COVID was having on the ability to achieve the team business plans. That didn't change over this quarter when this was assessed. So that's what has kept that one as a worsening in status.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm being honest, this is a rhetorical point that I think I'm still correct though, Jane, in saying this again, this LPP is so critical. We talk about funding, we're talking now about actually, can you do it? It's what I call the doability factor. You can write a plan that you like, but the question is, can you do it?
As part of the work criteria that is it achievable and prioritisation.
Yeah.
And then of course your funding policy and financial policies come into that concept as well, because do we borrow? Do we stay conservative? So needs to explore those aspects. You can borrow to fix those activities, or are we conservative? We will not borrow. The point and that service. So you have some options that need to be.
So devil's advocate in me says, so look at risk 7, Abel. It's going green, which is financial conservatism. We've got that answer solved, Abel. Okay. Okay, look at right. Yeah. No, good. This is really important. It's actually showing that your risks are so right on topic. The other one that I do want to draw your attention to is, well, actually, no, this is a genuine question for me, James, because it's risk 10, growth and demand dependent model make it hard to fund new infrastructure. I was wondering, even to the point, why is it a top 10 issue? I don't, and it's my ignorance of growth and what's happening around the district. So just had a wee question mark, is it actually a top 10?
Ms. Rue, would you like to speak to this?
Good ask. Almost as I've seen the one before. Is it?
Yeah.
Well, it's an eligibility issue. It's also the fact that we are with some of our new infrastructure course around additional capacity built into that. We are choosing to fund via rates. In fact, I think it's the next order paper item. This is a very relevant discussion for that about the role of DCs or not. Mission around that, because like all good local authorities, I suppose we probably always allow a degree of future spare capacity and renewals. Now, the theory, of course, if you talk what a developer have on is only making pay for the piece that is truly additional that you're creating for me in the future. So that's, and of course, particularly as standards continue to raise, you end up in a catch-22 about the timing of those increases needing to happen, and whether the mismatch between consent and real time frame and infrastructure lifespans that also can conflict and force renewals ahead of the capacity being and the capacity being used up. Which is not such a big deal if you've got significant growth happening, you've got to do it anyway. So there's a whole discussion.
Yeah, so it's actually, I mean, I'm not having trouble. So thank you. That's a good reason why it's here. I'm that again, this is taking a risk, but it's actually about a broader context, which is growth and how we manage. So I think, yes, Rex?
And serious Chair, taking back to 3 October 18, the risk management framework was created with the workshops that were held here. The real major public conversation around this one came about with primarily the central government support for the engineers and subsequently obviously the government as well. And you look at the relation to what this region, not just the council, but this region is compared to what other regions are getting. I think that reinforces that risk and actually brings that risk to fruition.
We're on our own.
We're not getting a lot. When I look at Telpo as an example, they made up here this $40 million out of this recent and developing new infrastructure. That's what that risk was actually about when we worked through that workshop a couple of years ago. So it's whether it's your point, I think, Chairman, whether it does get bumped or not, but trying to provide the context of why it's there was all about actually that central government support and how we aren't necessarily accessing compared to those larger growth. Steve Kisruri's talked for a long time about that, for the 50% of New Zealand population north of even down further north of the Telpo, and where's the money being spent? Just drive around central upper North Island to see where the money's been spent for infrastructure. So that's a bit of context. We just saw that in the latest tourism round as well. Yes. We got 8 million for all of the region.
Yeah, okay. Well, thank you for that. Are there any other comments that people want to raise at this stage? Christine, you're welcome to join in, by the way. Just see we do some pretty odd things in this meeting, but you're welcome to join her if you'd like to discuss, Gary.
In regards to your comment about the Sky and Open commitment, we've heard that 3 times this morning, so it's definitely real.
Yep. So yes, that's right. Even the point pressure you raised about the end report, but other, Ian's got some need for resources to get things done around this area. So yeah. Okay. Well, Jane, you've achieved exactly what we need, which is a good discussion around risk. I think there are a couple of things we've asked you to consider that it's sort of emerging issues rather than risks and actually where we play in that. And also perhaps I'll try to contextualise how these key risks relate to actually the work we're doing with the long-term plan. So whoever does a long-term plan, whoever does the long-term plan, may want to think about how that gets integrated into the discussion, and you guys might be ready for. So with that, I'd like to suggest that we move to page 284, which has the proposed motion on it. Would somebody like to move that, please? Thank you, Gary. Seconder. Thank you, John. All those in favour, please say aye. Those against? It's carried. Thank you, Jane. Appreciate that. Very, very good discussion. We go to order right here. 7.6, please. DCs. There's a challenge for us.
Getting your fair share of policy out on us.
That's not a problem at all, Karen. You're most welcome. By taking your lead off for us, please. There you go. Thank you.
The purpose of this report is for the committee to consider the draft policy on development and financial contributions. It's proposed that the committee recommend to council that it endorse the draft policy for public consultation. The policy records how and when council proposes to use development and financial contributions, what they fund and why. This policy is closely related to the revenue and finance policy insofar as it relates to the funding of CapEx. So a really brief refresher before we turn to the gist of the policy on the distinction between development and financial contributions, which should be fairly fresh. Development contributions aim to recover a proportion of the capital costs that a development imposes on network and community infrastructure. They may be assessed only where there is a projected growth that is likely to increase demand for services or activities and where CapEx is planned to meet this additional demand. And they've been in remission since 2015 in this policy. In contrast, financial contributions are a capital charge to mitigate the adverse environmental effects of an activity. They're provided for the district plan and they are not in remission currently. So as you can see in the background section of the report, council has approached the policy differently over time. The main outcome from the recent LTP workshop is that council would like to continue with development contributions in remission in order to encourage development in the district. It's proposed that financial contributions will remain operative. So accordingly, only minor changes have been made to the policy. These include updating the schedules to outline the projects in the upcoming 2021-31 LTP that have a demand-related component. So those are at page 362 of the agenda. There may be updated figures for these identified between now and this draft coming back to council on October 21st. And those changes will be brought to your attention, council's attention. If there's further updates between that 21st October council meeting and public consultation, it's proposed that a delegation is added that the CE can approve any changes that might occur. So it's not a foregone conclusion that there will be, it's just this is a process occurring right now. So process-wise, well, this is part of the LTP. It's ideal that council adopts this policy prior, hence why it's in front of you now. So the changes that this committee discusses today will go to council, and then it's proposed council endorse it for public consultation from 4th of November to 4th of December. Council will then get submissions early in the new year, followed by deliberations and adoption. So yeah, before returning to the recommendations, are there any questions or comments about the draft policy? You'll see that in the agenda, the changes that are proposed are redacted and pointed out, and that they are relatively minor.
Thank you, Kerry. That's very helpful introduction. So Kerry's quite rightly invited questions on the paper. Do we have any questions, John?
Just one. So the DCs have been in remission since 2015. Do we have any idea of how much revenue we potentially missed out on in that time?
Per year, Chair, is that Susan something you can answer insofar as the 2 projects identified in the schedules?
So what Councillor Douglas is asking is put out there
I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm fully in support of the plan as it is, but it's just interesting to know the approximate amount that we have foregone.
Unfortunately, don't have those.
Yes, okay. That would be a difficult number to assess.
Through the chair, and Councillor Kramer might be able to help, but I'm just unsure of any actual big subdivision since we did this remission. That would be, would or would not have been valid. Yeah, but it's not a lot, is it?
There's 100 watt subdivision right at the moment.
No, right.
Day one, he wasn't required to pay.
Yeah. So it's actually, thanks for that question, John, because it's actually, I look at it from a different way. And perhaps this is a policy question, Kerry. What evidence do we have that remitting is encouraging growth? Okay, we're saying that we are remitting for the purposes that essentially it will encourage growth. It's not about we just take what growth's coming. This is about we are a council that is open for business and keen for people to come and develop here. Do we have any evidence that remitting has been an incentive for that to occur? It hasn't been a rush. Okay. No, I think the discussion we've just been having about it is there. I guess I'm just trying to raise, John, I think you started trying to raise the debate, either what are we foregoing and or is it achieving the objective, which is encouraging growth? How many of those would have happened with or without a DC policy? Would the 100, would the 100 lot or application have occurred with or without it?
Given COVID at the moment, I would have thought we might have struggled, but yeah.
Yeah,
it's
okay.
safe.
Yeah.
It's still safe.
Right, yeah.
So I don't have information.
Some of it were operating. For example, so already unknown factors about and the potential changes of accessibility to a large number of years has had an influence on whether people estimate during a hot those uncertainties. Just to have that in isolation, don't think that answer look at the bigger picture.
Oh, I agree.
To have an
Yes.
understanding
Yeah.
those sort of influences that also had an impact on whether somebody built another hotel or a hotel which creates more employment, more residential, schooling, has that domino effect. So I think we need to look at a far wider scope than just how much money we can miss out. It's about a point.
And then just looking at the comments, around 2015, the rapid development subdivisions were starting to slow down, and we recognised that. And in order to try and maintain some momentum, we thought that by placing DCs in the mission, it would aid in development.
I think what I'm trying to reflect here, John, and I took it as a cue off your question, there is an objective in terms of the existing policy of remitting to an unknown amount. The critical question is it working? And I take your contextual point, Abel, there may be other factors which means the world changes and we can't determine it. But it does raise questions for me, because essentially, if I've got this right, Carrie, we update our DC policy, but we continue with remissions. Right? I got that right? Good. So I did make sense. I've written that right. So consequently, is the outcome well defined and will this meet it? That's what I want to know. That's what I think we should be trying to answer.
I think there's probably a second point though too, isn't there, about whether we're going to be incurring any costs as a result of these works that will lead us to acquire these limits.
Well, we've listed in the paper down our wastewater and sorry, I got my merge Riversdale Cemetery. I forget what it was. Which is a real need, so I should be very careful about that given my age. So we do have real development costs now. So yes, we do have it. I mean, your answer is yes. We were interested, why is it only those two? But that may be just reflecting assets being built to meet demand at this point. Right. Yeah, Paul.
I think too, we have got a strategy of seeking another 10,000 people to come to South. So we've got to think of the future a little bit. While that might seem like a long shot at the moment, I think it's a lot of world trends that could make it happen.
Okay. Good. Thank you. I've had my chance to have questions. The more questions people here. Can we look at? Oh, sorry, Paul.
Well, this is me not understanding. I could never do algebra. I was better at French. 3.2.1 on page 319, where that equation is written out for how it would be accepted. I don't know who would understand that. So,
developers would.
Yeah, well, that's got to play to and then across the road, across the page, sorry, on table 1, where about that unit of demand, where one's an area of less than 1,000 and it's divided by 1,000 per square metre. I don't really understand that. And the next one's quite obvious, where it's areas of more than 1,000 square metres.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I mean, it is a very complex policy. Initially, when this council was drafted externally by an expert in this area, and we continue to refine it and make sure it works. So I can advise as staff that we have peace of mind that these are completely compliant albeit very complex. So as opposed to a lot of our policies where we would like to be in plain English, this is probably an anomaly in that it's not viable to put it out there. It would probably turn into a 100-page document because I, as well as you, would need to go back to grade school algebra to distill it. Yeah.
Yeah, well, it's not, I'm not criticising, just that I don't understand.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people who- Okay, are there any questions? Sorry.
Well, it's not a question, that's the perennial Tokanui is spelled incorrectly. Please correct.
Yeah, we will speak to you, please. It's going to Tokanui.
Got to get the place names right.
Well, guys, I think we've probably given this a reasonable fresh. Gary quite rightly has given us good information about what the existing policy was, how it's updated. I think a reasonable sweep of that, Gary, is that it's minimal change. The third part, which I read from this, is that the essentially the ongoing policy of remitting development contributions continues. And I think the third part, or the fourth part of what you say, Gary, is that there may well be minor adjustments to this as we head towards consultation, particularly around the dollar value for assets and demand.
And I don't propose that those changes are going to be made, but we need to flag them.
Yes, I appreciate that future changes. Before I ask for a motion to in the way that's recommended, are there any final questions on this?
It's not a question, Mr. Chairman, but I noticed that the appendix 6 I haven't seen before does try to explain those questions. So, yeah, it may be the obvious. Okay. Can I ask you, please? Thank you, Abel. Move this motion. Dr. John, thank you. That we second any discussion on the motion. Sorry, I should ask that question. Any discussion on the motion? It's not. I'll put it then. I don't think, as we've agreed, I don't think there's any need for us to do it, but the key ones are Abel's moving is that we consider, we have, and provided feedback we have, we endorse this amended policy and financial contributions, and we recommend its release for public consultation. All those in favour, please say aye. Those against? Carried. Thank you very much, Gary. Thank you very much, Steve. That's great. We move to 7.7, please, which is the draft procurement policy. G'day, you guys. Welcome along.
This report presents to the committee a draft procurement policy and starts to seek feedback on the policy. It also requests the committee to recommend to council that the draft policy be endorsed for public consultation. So the current procurement policy was adopted in 2010, and for a number of reasons, it's now due to be reviewed. In the draft policy, staff additional to the content is appropriate to be in the policy. The policy just outlines council's high-level position that will set council's procurement approach. Policy has been informed by best practice guidelines of the Office of the Bureau, the Government Procurement Rules, and the requirements of the Local Government Act. Draft policy outlines a number of objectives and has a series of high-level policy statements on how council will achieve those objectives. The policy statements include that procurement will be included in legislation, that procurement will be consistent across council, and that procurement decisions will be based on achieving public value. Public value is a term used in the government procurement rules. It means that council will consider achieving a number of outcomes when it makes procurement decisions. In addition to considering quality and cost, social, environmental, cultural, and economic outcomes in the district will also be considered. The policy also aims to achieve broader community outcomes. The current policy, also aims to achieve broader community outcomes. So this policy approach is reasonably consistent with the council's current policy. Staff sought internal feedback on the draft policy, and feedback has also been sought from suppliers and Te Awamuanga. Only a small amount of external feedback has been received to date, but it was good policy. Staff have also been developing a procurement manual which contains a step-by-step process that staff will have to go through to procure. The manual outlines how staff will implement the policy approach set by council. At this stage, staff are not seeking feedback on the draft manual from this committee, but the manual is being provided to give context on how the policy will be applied. The manual is still at the working draft stage, and there are likely to be further changes. The manual will also is likely to be amended if council propose amendments to the draft policy. Deloitte undertook a procure to pay review last year and reviewed a version of the manual at that time and recommended a number of small changes. Staff have been incorporating and considering feedback too. So today, staff are requesting feedback from this committee and the recommendation to council. As next step, staff are proposing to present the draft policy to council on 21 October and to request council to put the draft policy out for public consultation. In the new year, staff will present any submissions received to council and progress the policy through to adoption. Staff will also complete the manual and make any required amendments to effect changes to the draft policy. The manual will be then presented again to this committee. So the recommendations for this report are on page 378 of the agenda. And I just want to check if there should be anything you would like to add additionally.
Probably just only one comment to note that in contrast to the current policy, as alluded to, it splits it into a policy and a manual, and the manual, at least in draft form that we have, could be viewed as a lot more prescriptive as compared with our previous policy. And so there's some further work there to make sure that it will be able to deliver the goals of the policy.
Thank you. Good suggestion. Okay, can I have questions for Robin, please, if that's relevant? Right, David?
Yeah, just the page 378, the current policy. It may be beneficial for us to understand those four bullet points, the reason why the current policy doesn't meet the requirements in today's environment. So that would be useful. For example, it may not always be possible to do it pretty close. At the moment, there is a requirement. So it would be useful for us to understand why those factors don't work, why we seek to change them. That would give us great understanding.
So the policy is intended to capture the full suite of purchasing decisions through the council, from very minor stationary decisions or ad hoc purchases in the order of $100 right through to very complex construction projects. In some cases, that free supplier requirement is not practical to be met. There may not be free suppliers. It may not be cost effective to get free quotes in terms of staff time, particularly if you're purchasing something with limited value. That's in terms of the free supplier requirement. The best practice since 2010 is a procurement. I guess the procurement rules have come into effect. What?
It's just recently been taken to a full position. It's just recently been adopted. It's slightly different approach.
So there might be changes in really risks associated with changing policy.
guess the risk would be ending up with a policy that is not, the current policy is well understood, and so, and it has enough leeway and flexibility to deliver a procurement result that meets the council's needs. The risk is overcomplicating that or ending up with a process that is substandard.
So I think that's a good question. If I could just build on that one, and so, you know, one of the risks is that we overcomplicate this. Right? So what I was attracted to was paragraph 22, Ashton Robin on page 380, and really it's the threshold for when the first significant change occurs in terms of the procurement policy and also practice, which is essentially at the $5,000 mark. So once you go above $5,000 in procurement, it actually, at least in terms of compliance, adds to it, and it's even higher when it gets higher. Do we know how many transactions above $5,000 we procure? Do we have an idea of our procurement sort of ecosystem in terms of amount of transactions we come through? Do you know that, Ian?
We do actually have, we did do an analysis of all the procurements. I don't have the figures with me right now, but we did a great big listing of all our supplies and effectively the level of spending that we did within them.
So what testing was, you know, sorry, I've already taken over your question, Abel, but what sort of discussion has been there amongst management that that's the right number? I'm not questioning it, by the way, in the sense of, gee, really? It's more a case of how have we reached that number? You guys must get a discussion about that somewhere.
What informs that number are the procurement rules and I guess good practice from other procurement manuals and policies and the New Zealand government procurement rules. That's really what informs that $5,000 figure. But to your point, it would be it would be worth rationalising that in our context to see whether that's appropriate for us.
Thank you. I mean, look, and that's actually, you know, that's delegations manual. That's what I would suggest would be procurement manual, because that might change over time, whereas your policy might not. So there's the benefit of, I think, the way you've structured it to move to having a policy, but also a manual with essentially guidance. And I would suggest that you have a lighter touch on actually how you update the manual. Would be my view. Are there any other questions, John?
Yeah, thank you. Do we have any examples of where the current procurement policy has failed to meet our expectations?
I think it's probably around those requests, those number of quotes that are required. That's very much been, when you go out to suppliers and you're constantly asking them to provide us with quotes, they get a bit tired of it. So that's that part where you've got to try and balance actually the practicalities with actually trying to get the work done. So that's probably the biggest part, is that requirement for 3 quotes. In fact, people just get tired of providing them all the time and possibly not getting the work as a result of it.
Well, I imagine there's quite a lot of staff time involved in getting the 3. So I don't hear a recommendation of 2, but is that something that we need to consider, or you would put to us, or what?
I think it's about getting that setting right for the 5,000, and also what I guess the other question is what you're considering when you're procuring. So, I mean, I often use office stationery as an example. Is it those individual items that you're procuring, or are you procuring a supplier for your office stationery over a number of years, and it changes the size, the magnitude of what it is that you're procuring? So there's that aspect that needs to probably be thought about in the context of certainly the manual and that decision, so that the analysis and that tension is applied at the right level. I also paused before your question because I wasn't sure whether whether it kind of feeds into that point, whether it's a failure of the policy or failure in delivering or interpreting the policy. Often it can be a mix of the two. So I just hesitate to say that the current policy is inadequate. Sometimes it's a question of interpretation or execution.
So that raises sorry, John, if I just tee off your question, that raises an interesting question on page 386, and this is related to the policy. All purchasing activity will be undertaken in accordance with requirements set out in the policy and in the procurement manual. And I was attracted to the headline above, which said procurement will be consistent across the council. What are the controls that we have in place to ensure that this is consistent, number one? And following up on your comments to John's question, what arrangements or controls do we have in place to review the actual working out of the policy, so to speak, on a day-to-day basis? In other words, is it working? Going back to answering your question, is it achieving the objectives we want to do? What are the controls we're going to have around that? How's it going to be consistent? How are you going to ensure it's consistent across council? Number one. Number two, are you doing reviews? What's the control follow-up to ensure that we're achieving our objectives? No, under the proposed policy, Robin, has that it will be consistent and it will be used right across. So I'm interested in the policy that we propose to adopt.
So, Mr. Chair, obviously the manual outlines a very step-by-step process and has requirements, particular standard procurement methods, and these are all going to be documented in the specification document for the lower cost and risk purposes and the high ones of procurement plan, and that all has to be signed off within the delegations manual, so there'll be checks and balances at that stage before people proceed to procure. So that is where the consistency checks and those standard methods set leads to the consistent approach.
So the weight of it being consistent applying policy rests with the authoriser, which I suppose is a axiomatic factor. Do we have any concept of a centre of excellence or a project procurement management office in this house, in this council?
Mr. Chair, we have through the establishment of my role, there's been an attempt to centralise procurement within services and assets, and of course that's why I'm here today.
Right.
For this policy,
yeah.
For this policy across the council, but I sit within services and assets, so there's probably a bit of maybe a bit of thought to be put towards how that might apply more widely.
I mean, I'm asking a question which is a wee bit outside the immediacy of the policy. I do stress on that one, but I think it's again, it's back to your point about risk. It's back to John's point about that's given rise to state. Is actually what other controls that we have around it to ensure that it is consistent and actually it is achieving our needs. So I'll leave that as a point. I think we need to keep going. Sorry, Dom.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. We had Dr. Ganesh talking about procurement and probably the main way that this organisation can support our community or enable our community, and we're talking about $60 million. I appreciate that there's not the capacity or the skill for all of that work, but I wonder if we could just focus a little bit more, concentrate a little bit more on enabling or having this procurement policy direct some of this spending towards our local economy. I know you're looking for value, and you've talked about the social, economic, and cultural interests of people and communities. I wonder if that needs to be reflected in this policy specifically. Sorry.
Previous Chair, I just wondered on page 387 there is a diagram of outcomes and matrix procurement decisions, and supposed to does specify that council will be looking to achieve those good outcomes for the community, economic, that will then flow through to the manual, would be connections where staff are, when they're determining how they set their evaluation criteria, they'll, this, at the moment in the draft manual, there's prompts there about looking at ways that those outcomes can be achieved to try and bring them to light when staff are making those evaluation criteria. So it is embedded in there at the moment, but I would be interested if you'd like it to be more strongly.
Through you, Mr. Chair, just for some background context, our current manual policy considers local suppliers. We make, and I won't be able to quote the exact wording, but to the effect that where they offer at least as good a value as the market as general, which is a market in general, which really forces the procurement. It still brings it back to selecting the best value supplier. So it's the quality. The statement's got a qualifier on it that doesn't place local content above any other content. Any other supplier currently.
Yes, thank you. I was looking for that wording as well. Talked about where the local supplier can provide as good as or better, but I wonder if we could recognise the value in supporting local suppliers over and above that criteria, rather than just on an equal footing. We place a value on the locals being even better. The dollar goes into our community versus out of our community. It's got the opportunity to go around. I think that Dinesh talked about that. Because I'm trying to retain the dollars through your procurement policy in our community. I just wonder if there's an opportunity to make that clear.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I think there's more flexibility proposed in the draft policy than in the current policy. Because at the moment, the draft policy is proposing us looking at all those factors, and there will be, when staff set their evaluation criteria, the opportunity to.
It's a really good point.
Yeah, know more about draft.
Well, and just to add to that, there may be, I think as you're alluding to, well, in my mind, it's a balance. There may be procurement that has a relatively, that you want to place a relatively higher importance on local content that the community wants to, versus other procurement that the community has limited interest in placing that importance on. So then it's fit for purpose. And so the flexibility in the policy, I guess the manual needs to have the capacity to consider the policy for different types of procurement.
Yes. In support of there are risks associated with not supporting some of that. Once they're gone, you don't expect. And some of the small operators, some of the reasonable size, road, some contracts, some business south of that, struggling to stay. Only ever a more complex, larger, there's a risk of losing that sort of knowledge, that sort of business within those communities. So that needs to be taken part of. Yes, but we say that they always get it. But that's where you start looking at wider picture. The other aspect, of course, that in some of the procurements, it could be up until years, a quick for local business or people or resources to be used that was external company. We still have more residents that live within your community that work for that company rather than another one like that. So we've still got the people working and they aren't always very nice.
That's it for you, Mr. Chair. That's a really important point because it's the measurement of, it's how you consider that local content as well. As local where the business is registered, as local the subcontractors and employees that are employed. And the question or the relative importance might be different depending on what you're buying. So I think, yeah,
Steve, I think
I
you.
was going to say, those issues, if you have a look at the template for this purchase plan, it allows for the clear specification of those factors relevant to the purchase at the time. Is this, is this a piece of work that has technical expertise that quite clearly is in a local supplier, and therefore you could give greater value to it, and talks about other aspects of public value that can come from purchasing locally, or is this more of a matter of very much scarcer technical expertise, where that technical expertise should pay greater rate than local? I'll use legal services as an example. Property conveyancing as a general rule is relatively straightforward, and so you would expect, and when I was writing up a procurement specification to manage some property procurement, I'd give greater weight to the ability to use local sources. Local government rating is quite a complex technical area, which is a relatively small pool of good quality, high expertise lawyers. Now, you can use local lawyer, as some of our people customers have done, or you can choose to use people who have the clear technical expertise in the area of rating. Now, that's a risk trade that also gets reflected in the purchasing plan, because we also have to specify the risks associated with using this procurement method. So if you look at those templates on page 319 to 419 through the next few pages there, we are balancing up what's the technical requirements for the jobs, what are the broader outcomes that can be achieved, and then also what are the risks associated with procurement approaches, those different options. So it's a matter of balancing up all those different factors across the broad spectrum, which is where the policy is saying you must do that. The templates are saying, yes, how will do that.
I agree, Steve, and I was going to reflect to Ava and Don. I get the flexibility in this policy in the manual. And I think that is well catered for in there. I mean, out of interest, you've had some page references there, Steve. I've gone to, for instance, 412, which talks about public value, sustainability, environmental protection. This is the only reason why I then come back to my concern about how do we ensure staff are confident and capable of making the judgment calls that are needed under the principles that are outlined here. And that is a follow-on, I guess, impact of adopting such a policy, which arguably is going to be broader than what you've had in the past, but is consistent with, as you pointed out, Robin, with the changing patterns of purchasing. Most councils are considering their social procurement approaches now. They have to have shovel ready. So it's one of the good reasons, John, to have this need to be consistent with shovel ready. So that's where I think we've got that. But I think we've had enough time debating this. You got
just got a quick question. I noticed it's to be advertised in the Ensign and the South Express. The Ensign's got good coverage out near where I live. I just wondered about the South Express. I don't know where it's covered.
The Express covers the rest of South the best way we can with most numbers, because they deliver into households
Okay, thank you for that. It's a good point. One thing we're going to advertise is make certain we've got it right, April. So look, I'd like to suggest that we've had sufficient time to both read, and we've had sufficient time to have a debate here today. Robin Ashton will take on board some of our comments, both specifically and actually about the broader aspects around it. That would be good. It would be useful, and we don't, I can talk with Anne about somewhere on the track for us to have some sense, probably in a year's time, that a policy has actually been implemented and actually it's working. You raised that as a very good point. SB actually is achieving our objectives, and I think this committee will be very interested in that is actually the case. Rightio.
through the chair, I fully support this. I think it's something that's been annoying a lot of people for a long time, is around confusion. And this is going to lay it out.
Yeah.
So I'm more than happy to move the recommendations.
Thank you, Gary.
And we'll take it out for public consultation.
Appreciate that. Do we have a second for that? Thank you, Paul. Any discussion on the motion? All those in favour, please say aye. Those against? It's carried. Thank you very much. Appreciate your time, Rob, and best luck with this. We look forward to all those good results to go with it. Rob, hello. Oh, okay, we have got time to 7.2. Sorry, we're going to get this. Yes, I appreciate that. But then why did you want to do this after lunch?
No, we comfortable. I think we could do both of the two reports if that's all right.
Okay. So we only have one minor procedural motion in the middle of that to go into public food, but otherwise let's rock for it. Okay. Bring your hands, Jenna.
Excellent, thank you. So
Oh, Kerry, sorry.
the purpose of this report is to provide an update on the health and safety related incidents and activity over the last quarter. So I'll take this report as read, but highlight a few key points. So what we've got in here is a summary of our indicators for the year 1st of January to the 31st of July 2020, and as attached. Basically, since June 2020, since I last did my report, there have been 3 events reported, and I note what those are on the report. In terms of some other key points, we've got health and safety governance training scheduled for November 2020 for all of the council. And I've also, Fiona has kindly also invited the chairs for that training as well. Chairs of the community boards, yes, correct. The last of the chemical upgrades are currently being undertaken, and that was due to be completed at the end of August. In July 2020, we undertook our high-level assessment and review of Council's approach to the management of health and safety, and that basically included that review of Council's framework, strategic plan, and performance measures and targets. So any opportunities identified as part of that gap analysis will be incorporated into our 2021 implementation plan. We continue to manage the risk and transmission of COVID-19. We've invested in additional PPE, including masks and sanitizer, and to ensure we continue to provide our essential services regardless of alert level changes. I'm happy to answer any questions from my colleague Terry.
Councillors, are there any questions like I asked you, Terry? Yes, sorry, John.
Just very briefly, on the panic alarms, who are they connected to? Who's going to respond? What are the response times? What training is given? Blah, blah, blah.
Sure, can I hand that over to Terry?
Sure. So we touched a wee bit on this last meeting. So they are connected to in first response a security organisation. They contact emergency services on our behalf because, and of course, FENS feature a really big part in these activations because our district officers are remote at times and they don't often have a police officer in the building in the town that's available because of the coverage that they do. So our people may not get a police officer when a panic alarm is activated. They may actually get a fire and emergency.
So is this stuff we want in the public arena, how we monitor our security? Just we're going out live, that was all. It's just a question.
That's a very good point, and can we just I agree that actually this is operational matters which I think warrants an answer. But let's deal with that.
Yeah, sorry, John, I didn't realise it was going to be such a.
Yeah,
That's okay. So we can summarise that. Yes, we've got the process covered, and yes, we've trained our staff.
Yeah.
Good. Janet, can I ask a question, please? It's in relationship to the high-level assessment. And my broad question is: are we going to see that? Because we've contributed to it, I think, with our interviews and what have you. The reason I'm interested in what it might say is that one of the obligations of us as elected members, and dare I say as independent, is that we have an ongoing understanding about the framework that's in place, the due diligence responsibilities that we have under the Act. I've made some assumption that this assessment will give us us as in individual members, a window in on actually how we're organised. Are we either a report on it, or are we able to get to see the report as well?
Okay, through you, Chair, it's actually on Info Council under this report.
Oh, is it? I'm
Yes.
not on Info Council. Sorry.
Yes. Yeah, on the hub. Yes, on the hub.
Yeah. Okay. Okay.
Yes.
Oh, well, I can
I'll
read it there.
sort you out
Oh, you'll
for
sort me out. Okay. Good.
And yes, I think I sent you a copy of it as well, actually.
Oh, that's even more scary.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah.
No problem. Yeah, exactly. And we would.
Well, I
that's
will
what
go
it's all
back and
about,
look,
is
and
about
I
sharing
thank
it.
you for correcting me.
Yes.
I'll go back and read it, and I'd like to suggest that to my fellow members, if you haven't. I do encourage you, because your responsibility, and we would be found wanting under significant investigation if we hadn't satisfied ourselves that those arrangements are in
Yes.
place.
In our workshop this afternoon, we're going to just highlight those key points that have come through.
Right, thank you.
Through,
Good. You can see I'm not prepared for a workshop, can't you? Okay. Are there any other questions for Janet and Terry at this stage? Ready, as from the chair, I'll move that we receive this report with appreciation. Can I have a seconder, please? Thank you, Julie. All those in favour, please say aye. Those against, that's carried. Thank you. I need to move to the procedural motion, if I've got my order correctly, which is that we move into public excluded. And I presume there's no reason, we've got all the people we need to have to stay around for that. We have a few more.
We've got a few more, but we've got the ones that we need included there.
Thank you. So again, from the chair, I'd like to move that we move to public excluded. Thank you. Abel, all those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against? That's carried. Thank you. So we can move on to the